80 aniversario de fundación de las Naciones Unidas, promovamos más y más coherencia de la conciencia humana. Debemos seguir alzando voces, uniendo manos y corazones, clamando y luchando, exigiendo y combatiendo, para que esta etapa de vida en este planeta que compartimos deje de estar marcada por la muerte en todas sus formas, por el secuestro del alma inteligente, y sea más bien aliento, ánimo, fuerza de esperanza. Nos llamamos a trabajar en unión sensible y sostenible, capaz, ingeniosa y creativa. Nos llamamos a seguir caminando convencidos, fuertes, construyendo unidad, construyendo hermandad, afinidad, unidad que es la verdadera fuerza, cumpliendo con el siempre más allá, que como divisa espiritual profunda debería ser himno y acción cotidiano de cada una y de todas y todos. En el 80 aniversario de Naciones Unidas, nos urgimos a cambiar la lógica, cambiar las actitudes, cambiar la acción, ser humanos verdaderamente, dejar de repetir y repetir sin resultados. La unidad y la hermandad deben ser el camino que asumamos juntos, con valentía y orgullo, para que sigamos creando este otro mundo que ya se perfila como otro amanecer. La pobreza, la violencia, la arrogancia son ignorancia. Amar es combatir, luchar, luchar, vencer, vencer, vencer. Patria y dignidad. Patria y humanidad. Gracias por escucharnos.
Thank you for your attention.
Muchas gracias. I thank the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Nicaragua. I now give the floor to His Excellency Archbishop Paul Richard Gallagher, Secretary for Relations with States of the Holy See.
Mr. President, I am pleased to convey the warm greetings and blessings of Pope Leo XIV to you and the representatives of the nations gathered here, and to congratulate you on your election to lead this Assembly. At the outset, I would like to thank this General Assembly for the tribute paid to Pope Francis following his demise last April. As you may all know, when Pope Leo XIV was elected, his first words to the world were, "Peace be with you all." A peace that is unarmed and disarming, humble and persevering. In a word torn by wars and conflicts, he made peace to be his first message. Mr. President, the theme chosen for this year's general debate, Better Together, 80 years and more for peace, development and human rights, highlights the ongoing importance of multilateral cooperation in addressing global issues. This is particularly pertinent this year, as the international community commemorates the establishment of the United Nations in 1945. It is an opportune moment to reaffirm the organization's core values of fostering international peace, development and universal human rights, values that are all the more important in an increasingly fragmented world. It is crucial for the international community to take collective action to prevent and end conflicts, combat poverty, and advance human rights solemnly declared in the 1948 Universal Declaration, and one of the most important achievements of this organization. It is important to remember that isolationism leads to unpredictable instability, whereas unity fosters responsible resilience and shared progress. This is strikingly evident in the current circumstances, where escalating geopolitical tensions, a raging climate crisis, widening inequalities, and rising poverty demand renewed global solidarity. The United Nations must adapt itself to a transformed world and maintain its effectiveness in the face of emerging threats such as environmental degradation and technological disruption, which no single country can tackle alone. As representatives of all the nations of the globe, we are united by our shared humanity, created in the image and likeness of God, called to live in fraternity, solidarity, and mutual respect. In a world grappling with mounting challenges, it is necessary to recommit to the foundational pillars of peace, justice, and truth. It is imperative to explore and build on these pillars, while drawing lessons from history to forge a more equitable future. Mr. President, of the many crises currently affecting the international community, the war in Ukraine is one of the most profound and painful. Its prolonged existence is turning once vibrant cities into piles of rubble and extinguishing the smiles of children who should be growing up playing games instead of living amid the constant sound of sirens and in shelters. This war must end now. The Holy See renews the appeal made by Pope Leo XIV for an immediate ceasefire, which will pave the way for sincere and courageous dialogue. The Holy See is paying close attention to the situation in the Middle East with a view to achieving a just and lasting peace between Israel and Palestine based on a two-state solution in accordance with international law and all relevant United Nations resolutions. Pope Leo XIV implored that all the hostages be freed, that a permanent ceasefire be reached, that the safe entry of humanitarian aid be facilitated, and that humanitarian law be fully respected, especially the obligations to protect civilians as well as prohibitions of collective punishment, indiscriminate use of force, and the forced displacement of the population. Moreover, an equitable solution to the issue of Jerusalem, based on international resolutions, is essential for achieving a just and permanent peace. Any unilateral decision or action which alters the special status of Jerusalem and the status quo is morally and legally unacceptable. With regard to Syria, the Holy See supports the importance of a peaceful and just transition in the country, as well as the protection of the rights of Syrians of all ethnic and religious backgrounds without discrimination. The instability afflicting many African states generates profound and interconnected challenges. In this scenario, the Sahel, Cabo Delgado, and some areas of the Horn of Africa emerge as zones of instability. In fact, the jihadist threat, endemic poverty, illicit trafficking, the climate crisis, and internal conflicts converge in a spiral that puts the lives of millions of people at risk, despite the efforts of local governments. In the face of these challenges, the resilience of African communities, especially young people, remains an essential resource that must be supported with targeted investments in education, health, infrastructure, and inclusive governance models. More than ever, a coherent and lasting commitment by the international community is essential to support African countries on their path to stability, peace and economic development. The deterioration of the situation in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo is a source of concern for the Holy See. The provinces of Ituri, North Kivu and South Kivu are experiencing ethnic tensions, violence perpetrated by rebel groups, armed clashes, serious human rights violations and disputes over the exploitation of natural resources. The Holy See welcomes the signing of the Comprehensive Peace Agreement between the DRC and the M23 armed group, as well as the peace agreement signed by the Congolese and Rwandan foreign ministers, which aims to end the decades of fighting in the east of the country. However, new waves of violence are feared. Last July, the Alliance Democratic Forces carried out a brutal terroristic attack on a church in Komanda, Ituri, resulting in the death of more than 40 worshippers. The withdrawal of MONUSCO raises questions about its ability to fulfill its mandate and address ongoing challenges. It is essential to strengthen the support of the international community and diplomatic and political mediation efforts to ensure that the parties fulfill their commitments and find a stable and appropriate solution to the ongoing situation. The fratricidal conflict in Sudan is also a source of grave concern. The Holy See strongly renews its appeal for an immediate cessation of hostilities and the commencement of genuine negotiations, the only means by which all Sudanese people can forge a future of peace and reconciliation. The Holy See is monitoring developments in South Sudan closely and is calling on all political actors to commit to the path of dialogue and collaboration and to implement the 2018 peace agreement with sincerity and responsibility as the foundation for building a peaceful and just coexistence. In many parts of the world, particularly in Latin America, drug trafficking is corroding societies and causing extreme violence. The Holy See is deeply concerned about this complex phenomenon, which is often linked to unresolved social issues in different countries. Alongside joint efforts by states to combat drug trafficking, the Holy See emphasizes the importance of investing in human development, such as education and job creation, to prevent people from unwittingly becoming involved. The Holy See is also worried about the rising tensions in the Caribbean Sea and is calling for restraint to prevent any actions that could destabilize the coexistence between nations and undermine international law. The dramatic situation in Haiti is also being closely followed by the Holy See. The country is plagued by violence of all kinds, human trafficking, forced exile and kidnappings. The Holy See hopes that with the necessary and concrete support of the international community, the social and institutional conditions can be created to enable Haitians to progress towards peace and security. The Holy See is paying close attention to the situation in Nicaragua and hopes that religious freedom and other fundamental rights of individuals and society will be adequately guaranteed. The Holy See reiterates the need for sincere, respectful, and constructive engagement in dialogue aimed at finding solutions that will foster peace and harmony in the country. Turning to Southeast Asia, numerous situations of instability and conflict are further exacerbating long-standing humanitarian concerns. In Myanmar, 4.5 years of internal conflict have left the local population devastated. In this situation of enduring conflict, transnational crime is on the rise. Recent investigations suggest that there are tens, if not hundreds of thousands of trafficked individuals in these centres, located primarily along the borders between Myanmar, Thailand, China, Cambodia and Laos. Only by the concerted efforts of the international community can transnational crime be adequately addressed. The Holy See is closely following developments in the Western Balkans, particularly in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The Balkan countries are connected to European values for historical and cultural and geographical reasons, and they aspire institutionally to integrate with states that already belong to the European Union. The Holy See maintains that the historical and current issues affecting the region can only be resolved through dialogue and collaboration. The Holy See, while acknowledging the peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan signed in August, invites the two countries to continue on the path of reconciliation in order to achieve stable and lasting peace in the South Caucasus. Mr. President, on the occasion of the 80th anniversary of the United Nations, the Holy See reaffirms the enduring importance of this institution and the significant good it has accomplished across numerous fronts since its founding in 1945. The United Nations continues to be a vital forum in which all nations engage in dialogue as sovereign equals to address global challenges. There is an increasing general agreement in the international community on the need to reform this institution by rediscovering its foundation and adapting it to reflect the needs of the current era. As Pope Leo XIV affirms, this effort demands a genuine willingness to engage in dialogue inspired by the desire to communicate rather than clash. As a result, there is a need to give new life to multilateral diplomacy and to those international institutions conceived and designed primarily to remedy eventual disputes within the international community. The Holy See calls for a recommitment to the original principles enshrined in the UN Charter. It is important to resist the temptation to replace these foundational commitments with new ideas or programs that risk diluting the UN's mission. Central to this mission is striking a balance between the four pillars of the United Nations, promoting of human rights, maintaining international peace and security, achieving sustainable development, and upholding rule of law. The rule of law, in particular, is the sine qua non of a just international order, providing the foundation for all other efforts. This anniversary provides an opportunity to reinforce the United Nations position as a beacon of hope and a force for good in addressing humanity's most urgent needs.
I thank the Secretary for Relations with States of the Holy See. I now give the floor to His Excellency Kim Song-yong, Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea.
Madam President, distinguished delegates, first of all, I'd like to express my expectation that the 80th session of the UN General Assembly, convened in the significant year of the 80th founding anniversary of the United Nations, will come to excellent fruition amid extraordinary interest of the participants. Taking note of the opening address of Mr. Guterres and the UN Secretary General, On September 3, I commended his assertion that the role of the UN, the one-of-a-kind podium, should be enhanced, since an individual state cannot address issues alone, and that the UN should be reformed to fit for the 21st century. As reflected in the theme of the current session, Better Together, 80 years and more for peace, development, and human rights, we are now at a crucial watershed, where we all look back on the 80-year-long history of the United Nations and chart the future. 80 years ago from now, humankind adopted the UN Charter on the debris of the disastrous war, thereby laying a cornerstone for the contemporary international relations and establishing the most inclusive international organization, the United Nations. Since its foundation, the UN has made remarkable successes in various fields, including peace and security and socio-economic development, by accelerating decolonization worldwide and leading the codification of universal norms of international law. Despite many twists and turns, it is fortunate that a new world war has not broken out. It can be said to be a desired result of the main spirit of the UN Charter to save succeeding generations from the scourge of the World War, which twice has brought untold sorrow to mankind. We cannot underestimate the role that the UN played in promoting cooperation among nations in the socio-economic fields such as poverty eradication and fight against communicable diseases, and in propelling sustainable development at a global level. However, in the annals of the UN history, disgraceful pages are also recorded, where the title of the UN, overwhelmed by high-handedness and arbitrariness of the hegemonic forces, was abused in exerting pressure to deprive sovereign states of their legitimate right to normal development, quite contrary to the spirit of the Charter. We should not feel relieved nor congratulate ourselves on the non-occurrence of the World War III for the past 80 years. Instead, we should pay due attention to the fact that the inducible threat has persisted and is now becoming more serious. We should take measures accordingly. Madam President, the international community is now witnessing a violent world after World War II. The modern history has recorded many incidents and events, but today the international norms and order established and consolidated along with the foundation of the UN are disregarded, and the sovereignty of states is openly violated as never before. The indiscriminate tariff war vis-à-vis the entire world has plunged the global economy as a whole into the swamp of stagnation and instability. Even the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, committed to eliminating inequality and poverty and ensuring human dignity worldwide, is denied for the reason that it does not meet the interest of an individual country. This is the stark reality. The UN has served as a multilateral forum where all countries of the world, big or small, get together and discuss common responses to global challenges on an equal footing, transcending differences in size, population, and state power. That UN is now faced with an unprecedented severe crisis. All these turbulences and pains suffered by the world are fundamentally caused by high-handedness and arbitrariness and avarice of hegemonic forces in their attempt to subject the whole world to their interests and to place their exclusive interests above the common good of mankind. Madam President, Today, the complicated international situation highlights the need to reconsider the role of the UN, responsible for maintaining international peace and security. As the world's most universal international organization, comprising all sovereign states on the globe, the UN cannot be represented by a certain individual state or a small group of states. In particular, in order to prevent arbitrariness and high-handedness of specific forces, it is imperative to expand and strengthen the representation of developing countries that take up an absolute majority of the UN membership, and to correct the Western-led inappropriate structure in the Security Council entrusted with an important mandate of maintaining international peace and security. Only when the UN puts an end to the arbitrary, high-handed, biased, and double-dealing practices in all its activities, and strictly adheres to the principles of sovereign equality, non-interference in internal affairs, impartiality, and objectivity, can it restore its image as an organization with the full qualifications and capacity for realizing the purposes of the Charter. Madam President, peace and security are long-cherished desire of humanity and the first agenda of the UN. Without peace and security, we can neither attain the SDGs nor think about a good future that ensures human dignity and prosperity. However, the present objective security situation of the Korean Peninsula is faced with serious challenges more than ever. The US-ROK, US-Japan military exercises, and the US-Japan-ROK trilateral military cooperation system directly targeting the DPRK rapidly evolved into a more offensive and aggressive military bloc with a nuclear element contained. Meanwhile, war exercises and military buildup against our state are breaking all the previous records in terms of scale, nature, frequency, and scope. Nowhere in the world can we find such a place as the Korean Peninsula, where the world's biggest nuclear weapon state and its allied forces conduct bilateral and multilateral war exercises all the year round, and even stage real war drills simulating the use of nukes targeting a sovereign state by mobilizing massive multinational combined forces and latest strategic assets. Even a few days before the current session begins, the U.S. and its allied forces waged nuclear war drills such as Iron Mace and Freedom Edge, aimed at mastering the procedure and methods of nuclear attacks against the DPRK and the fait accompli scenario, thus extremely straining the situation on the Korean Peninsula. Yet, even in the face of the tremendous military threat directed against the DPRK and the dangerous security landscape, roaring guns of war are silenced, and peace and security are firmly safeguarded on the Korean Peninsula. This is an undeniable reality. Thanks to our state's enhanced physical war deterrent in direct proportion to the growing threat of aggression of the U.S. and its allies, the will of the enemy state to provoke war is thoroughly contained, and the balance of power on the Korean Peninsula is ensured. In order to permanently maintain this state of balance and ensure everlasting peace on the Korean Peninsula, we have stipulated nuclear in our Constitution as a sacred and absolute thing that can never be touched upon and tampered with. Imposition of denuclearization on the DPRK is tantamount to demanding it to surrender sovereignty and the right existence and violate the Constitution. We will never give up sovereignty, abandon the right to
행위를
existence,
하지
and
않을
violate
것입니다.
the Constitution.
조선민주주의민공화국 국무위원장 김정은
Comrade
동지께서는
Kim Jong-un, President of the State
지난
Affairs of the
최고인민
DPRK,
제14기
made it clear
제13차
at
회의에서
the 13th session
우리
of
당과
the
정부는
14th Supreme People's Assembly on
헌법과
September
행무기
21
핵무력 정책에 관한
that our
기본법을
party and the
변함없이
government would
한치
invariably
뒤틀림도 없이
and
굳건히
firmly
수행해 나갈
safeguard,
것이며
without the slightest
우리
vacillation,
국가의 최고
the
리그를
Constitution of the
철저히 감보해
DPRK
나갈
and its
것이라고
basic
명백히
law on the policy
증명하셨습니다.
of nuclear forces, perpetuating the position
우리
of nuclear
국무위원장 동지
weapons,
시정
and
방침은
thoroughly guarantee the supreme
국법이며
interest of our state.
우리는
The policy line of a
국법을
Comrade
철저히
President of
수호할
the
것입니다.
State Affairs represents our state law,
우리는
and we
우리
will defend
국법이고
the state law
국책이며
without fear.
주권이고
We will never
선진권인
give up nuclear, which is
핵을
our
절대로
state law,
내려놓지 않을
national
것이며
policy, and
그
sovereign
어떤
power,
경우에도 이
as well as
주장을
the right to existence.
철회하지 않을
Under
것입니다.
any circumstances, we will never
부장
walk
선생.
away from this position.
조선민주주의민공화국
President,
강력한 힘으로
The DPRK is
평화와 안전을
vigorously
담보한
opening
기초
up the
위에서
road to overall
전면적
national
국가 부흥의 활로를
prosperity
힘차게
on the basis
이어나가고
of
있습니다.
peace and security guaranteed by its
공업과 농업을
powerful
비롯한
strength.
국제 경제 존발
Vigorous
국가 경제
efforts are
존발에서
underway to further
자립경제의
consolidate
발전
the driving
동력과
force
잠재력을
and
더욱
potentials
튼튼히
for development
생산
of a
목표를
self-reliant
전면화한
national
투쟁을
economy in the
벌어짐으로써
overall national economy,
조선농당
including
제8차 대회가
industry and
제시한
agriculture,
국가경제발전
and to meet
5개년
the
계획이
output
완수는
target.
확정적인
As a result,
것으로
the
되고 있습니다.
completion of the 5-year plan of a national
특히 평양시
economic
어만 세대
development
살림지
set
건설
forth by
사업이
the 8th Congress of the
연차별로
Workers'
끊임없이
Party of
시행되어
Korea is
계획을
definitely
훨씬
within
눈간
reach.
속에 농촌 문화주택들과 대규모
Notably,
원시농장,
construction of 50,000 residential houses in Pyongyang is carried out without fail on an annual basis, well ahead of schedule. Meanwhile, creatures for welfare of the people, including rural dwelling houses, large-scale greenhouses, and modern hospitals, are being built grandiosely, with a view to providing all people with a fluent and civilized new life and rapidly raising the level of development of all regions within a short period of 10 years. The newly adopted policy of rural development is dynamically executed with tangible results one after another. The DPRK is confidently following the road of its own choice without any fluctuation or vacillation, even under the political turmoil worldwide. This reality is a brilliant fruition of the unshakable spirit of independence and correct leadership of the Workers' Party of Korea and the government of the DPRK. Madam President, this year, marking the 80th anniversary of the end of World War II, colorful political and cultural events have taken place in various countries commemorating the victory in the anti-fascist World War. It is an expression of the rock-firm will of the righteous international community not to tolerate the attempts to deny the result of the anti-fascist World War and national liberation struggles achieved at a tremendous sacrifice.
제2차 세계대전이 끝난 지도 80조
8
년이
years have
흘렀지만
passed since the end of World
오늘
War
중동에서는
II. Yet, genocide and crimes against
히틀러도 무색해할
humanity
집단
that can even
대학살과
overshadow Hitler are
반인륜
now
범
openly
쪽
committed in the
만행이
Middle East,
공공연히
much to the
자행되어
consternation
세계를
of the world.
경악해 하고 있습니다. 지난 2년간 6만 명이 넘는 팔레스티나
Israel, which
민간인들을 대량
massacred
학살한
over
이스라엘은
60,000 Palestinian civilians in the
가자
past 2
지대를
years,
무력으로 점령하고
is seeking to occupy the whole
팔레스티나
area
인구를
of Gaza by
완전히
force
멸살시키려
and
하고
completely exterminate the Palestinian population.
우리는 이스라엘이
We strongly
반인륜 범죄
urge
행위를
Israel
당장
to stop
중지하고
immediately crimes against
가자 지대에서
humanity
철수할 것을
and
강력히
withdraw from the
요구하며
Gaza Strip. Likewise,
팔레스티나가
we
동북
fully
구두를
support the
수도로
establishment of an
하는
independent state
독립국가를
of
창설하고
Palestine with East
유엔의
Jerusalem
정성국으로
as its
가입한
capital
것을
and the
전폭적으로
Palestine's full-fledged
지지합니다.
membership of the UN.
우장 선생,
Madam President,
자주, 평화,
independence,
신선은
peace, and friendship are the invariable external policy ideals
이념입니다.
of the DPRK. The
조선민주주의민공화국은
DPRK will, as in the
지난 시기와
past, so in the
마찬가지로
future,
앞으로도
collaborate with all
침략과
countries
간섭,
and nations
지배와
that
예속을
oppose
반대
and
배격하고
reject aggression intervention, domination, and subjugation, and aspire after independence and justice, irrespective of differences in ideals and systems. The DPRK will promote multi-faceted exchanges and cooperation with the countries that respect and take friendly approaches towards it. Thank you.
I thank the Vice Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. I now give the floor to His Excellency George Luca, Chair of Delegation of Republic of Moldova.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates. Yesterday, the citizens of the Republic of Moldova made their choice in the most important election in our country's history. They spoke with clarity, courage, and dignity, despite unprecedented pressure, disinformation, and interference from the Kremlin. The Moldovan people defended democracy through free and fair elections. This was not merely a political contest. It was a test of resilience, of whether a small nation can withstand relentless attempts to destabilize, divide, and erode trust in its institutions. Moldova passed this test. Our citizens, from villages to cities, and from the diaspora who traveled thousands of kilometers to cast their ballots, stood united. They refused to be intimidated or deceived. This is a victory for the entire nation, a victory for democracy, for Europe, and for freedom. The Moldovan people have given a strong mandate for our European integration. They affirmed that our future lies in the European family, in peace, prosperity, and the rule of law. The European Union has been indispensable for Moldova's progress. EU support has strengthened our economy, modernized our institutions, and helped us withstand external pressure, from energy blackmail to disinformation campaigns. Beyond assistance, Europe has provided us with a model, a community built of solidarity, justice, and the conviction that prosperity is best achieved together. We are grateful to our European and international partners who have supported Moldova's resilience and democratic transformation. Their solidarity has made it possible for our people to resist external threats and to remain on the path of reforms, reform of injustice, governance, and the fight against corruption, that are not only conditions for European integration accession, but also the foundation of our fair and accountable state. But let us be clear, this democratic choice was made against the backdrop of hybrid warfare. Interference began long before election day and will not end with it. Russia has sought to undermine Moldova's sovereignty through illicit financing, disinformation, cyber attacks, and intimidation of voters. On elections day itself, attempts were made to obstruct the diaspora vote, spread false narratives, and target electoral infrastructure. Our institutions, supported by civil society and independent media, stood guard and defended its sovereign will of our people. Yet, national resilience is not enough. The threats we face are global. Democracies everywhere are being tested by increasingly sophisticated tools designed to manipulate information, erode trust, and distort elections. That is why Moldova calls for stronger cooperation to safeguard democracies. We urge the Assembly and UN members to join forces in protecting democracies from novel threats with novel means. Moldova's commitment to democracy is inseparable from our commitment to peace. We share a 1,200 kilometers border with Ukraine, which continues to resist Russia's brutal aggression. We know how fragile is peace, and we know why Moldova can stand here today in peace, because Ukraine stands. We resolutely condemn Russia's war of aggression. We support Ukrainians' sovereignty and territorial integrity within its internationally recognized borders, including its territorial waters. Every missile that strikes homes and civilian infrastructure violates international law. Accountability must follow, and Moldova supports the international community's efforts to document and prosecute such crimes. This war is not only against Ukraine, it is a war against Europe, against freedom, and against the international order established by the United Nations Charter. Moldova will continue to stand with Ukraine and with all those who defend peace. The Republic of Moldova is committed to an exclusively peaceful reintegration based on our sovereignty and territorial integrity within international recognized borders. We once again call for complete, unconditional, and immediate withdrawal of Russian troops and ammunition from Moldovan territory, in line with Russia's own international obligations. This withdrawal must be transparent and under international monitoring. Excellencies, Moldova's election was a national choice, but its meaning is global. It showed that democracy can prevail even under relentless pressure. Yet, democracies cannot stand alone. They need solidarity, resilience, and support. As the United Nations marks its 18th anniversary, Moldova reaffirms its commitment to the United Nations Charter. We support this organization's effort to secure peace, advance the Sustainable Development Goals, address climate change, protect human rights, and establish global norms against corruption, disinformation, and foreign interference. Distinguished delegates, the people of Moldova have chosen freedom. They have chosen Europe. They have chosen peace. We are fully aware that consolidating our democracy and advancing towards European membership will be a demanding journey that made more difficult by Russia's persistent threats. But it is a journey we are determined to pursue. With unity at home and solidarity from our partners, above all the European Union and the United Nations family, we continue to build a democratic, resilient, and prosperous Moldova, a Moldova that contributes to peace in Europe and to the work of these United Nations. I thank you.
I thank the Chair of Delegation of the Republic of Moldova. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Agnes Mary Chimbiri Mulande, Chair of Delegation of Malawi.
Madam President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, I'm honored to address this 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly under the theme, Better Together, 80 years and more for peace, development, and human rights. This milestone stands as a testament to the United Nations' extraordinary legacy of fostering peace, advancing sustainable development, and championing human dignity. It affirms humanity's enduring journey to build a world where every generation can flourish, where nations rise above division to resolve their differences with wisdom, where the pursuit of justice and harmony binds us as a one global community. Malawi commits to strengthening multilateralism to ensure a prosperous, equitable, and secure world for current and future generations. Madam President, the theme, Better Together, aligns closely with Malawi's foreign policy, our blueprint for advancing national interests through economic diplomacy, protection of sovereignty, and global cooperation. Anchored in the Malawi 2063, our long-term vision, we aspire to become a self-reliant, industrialized, middle income nation by 2063, driven by agriculture, tourism, mining, and manufacturing. Achieving this goal demands both unwavering national commitment and active engagement with the global community in a peaceful world. While sovereignty remains the cornerstone of our identity to ensure the protection of territorial integrity and natural resources, our policy equally recognizes that global collaboration is essential. In this spirit, Malawi will continue to uphold the principles of the UN Charter, promote good neighborliness, and respect the sovereign equality of all states to advance peaceful coexistence and regional, continental, and global stability. Madam President, building on our unwavering commitment to sovereignty and collaborative partnerships, the Republic of Malawi firmly acknowledges that peace and security serve as fundamental pillars for sustainable development. Guided by the principle of Ubuntu and recognizing our shared humanity, the Republic of Malawi demonstrated her dedication to international peace and contributing a significant number of troops and police personnel to various United Nations missions. The Republic of Malawi is resolute in its commitment to preventive diplomacy and actively promoting dialogue, impartiality, and effective conflict resolution as essential strategies for fostering stability. This commitment is reflected in our active engagement and unwavering support for peace initiatives led by the United Nations, African Union, and the Southern African Development Community. We believe that collaborative efforts are essential in addressing multifaceted challenges that threaten global peace and the rules-based order. Furthermore, it is important to highlight the significant strides that the Republic of Malawi has made towards promoting participation of women in peacekeeping operations. The Republic of Malawi actively prioritizes the deployment of female peacekeepers in operational roles, recognizing their unique ability to connect with and address the specific needs and experiences of women in conflict zones. This initiative not only empowers female personnel, but also enriches the overall effectiveness of our peacekeeping efforts by fostering a deeper understanding of the complexities surrounding gender issues in these environments. On that note, Madam President, I'm pleased to report that the positive outcomes of this approach are becoming increasingly evident. The inclusion of women in our peacekeeping forces has proven beneficial not just for the missions themselves, but also for the communities we serve. Furthermore, I'm proud to say that Malawi stands among the nations that have registered significant strides towards gender equality and the empowerment of women and girls. In this regard, I would like to reiterate the government of Malawi's commitment to the promotion of women's participation in all spheres of life at the highest levels possible. We in Malawi believe that no meaningful socioeconomic progress can happen when half of the population is left behind. Our conviction to gender equality and women empowerment is driven by the recognition that women and girls are the bedrock on which social progress is based. It is for this reason that Malawi supports the proposal to consider electing a female United Nations Secretary General. At this juncture, let me express gratitude to all cooperating partners, including the United Nations, who have supported our efforts and initiatives on women empowerment, helping us to end child marriages, to reduce early pregnancies, to increase school completion rates for girls, and to ensure that increasing numbers of women participate meaningfully in our nation's affairs. Madam President, humanity's progress is inseparable from global peace and security. For true stability can only be achieved when no one is left behind. Yet we have fallen short in narrowing inequality as the gap between rich and poor nations continues to widen, and developing countries like Malawi struggle with limited fiscal space, limited technology transfer, low productivity, and limited participation in global trade. Last year, we adopted the Pact of the Future, reaffirming our collective commitment to inclusive, resilient, and sustainable global governance and development. The Republic of Malawi, therefore, calls on the international community to foster an environment that supports inclusive growth, ensuring that its benefits reach the most vulnerable. To realize this vision, we must strengthen trade and investment as engines of prosperity and harness the transformative potential of science, technology, artificial intelligence, and private sector development for national and global development. Madam President, climate change stands as the most critical existential threat of our era, with its adverse effects disproportionately impacting developing nations like Malawi. Despite contributing minimally to global greenhouse gas emissions, the Republic of Malawi endures some of the most severe consequences of climate change. The increasing frequency and intensity of severe droughts, catastrophic floods, and destructive cyclones jeopardize food security by disrupting agricultural production, displacing vulnerable communities, and threatening hard-won developmental advancements. The Republic of Malawi has lived with this reality. Erratic weather patterns threaten our agricultural backbone, pushing vulnerable communities into food insecurity and economic despair, conditions that are ripe for discord. It is therefore important that our discussion on peace must be intrinsically linked to climate resilience, sustainable agriculture, and food sovereignty. Sovereignty, just like peace, is threatened by food insecurity. We therefore call for increased investment in early warning systems, climate-smart agriculture, and social safety nets. A world that is food secure is a world more peaceful. Considering these challenges, Madam President, the Republic of Malawi urgently calls for bold and accelerated climate action that the full and effective implementation of the Paris Agreement. This involves not only enhanced commitments to reduce emissions, but also significant scaling up of financial resources dedicated to ensuring equitable access to sustainable technologies. The Republic of Malawi firmly believes that only through a collective sense of responsibility and international solidarity can we protect our planet and provide a sustainable future for our generations to come. Beyond various agreements and boardroom meetings, time for action is now. We must act decisively to safeguard both our environment and the livelihoods of those most at risk. Madam President, the global community also needs to work together to address public health issues. My delegation, therefore, applauds your office for the efforts that led to the adoption of the political declaration on the prevention and control of non-communicable diseases and the promotion of mental health and well-being. No nation has been spared from the impact of these two health issues, whose causes are numerous. The response to these issues requires concerted efforts and collaboration. It is, therefore, rather disheartening that the political declaration faced many hurdles during the negotiation process. My delegation wishes to appeal for shared commitment to address the issues, and indeed all other emerging public health issues. Madam President, in this digital age, artificial intelligence presents both unprecedented opportunities and profound challenges. If harnessed responsibly, AI can accelerate development, improve health and education, and unlock economic growth. Yet, without clear governance, it risks deepening inequalities and undermining security. We therefore call for a global framework that ensures AI is ethical, inclusive, and accessible to all nations, enabling it to serve as a force for development rather than division. The Republic of Malawi is optimistic that AI will usher in a new era of enhanced productivity for its citizens, helping to propel the country's development trajectory. Madam President, let me take this opportunity to express my gratitude to your office for convening a high-level plenary meeting to commemorate the 30th anniversary of the World Programme of Action for Youth. The youth make up a large proportion of the population of Malawi and indeed in Africa. They are an indispensable force for sustainable development. They are leaders, major actors and beneficiaries of investments and creators of wealth for today and tomorrow. It is for this reason that the government of Malawi developed the 2023-2028 National Youth Policy to demonstrate its commitment to place young people at the center of the national development agenda and to undertake reform, implementation, and monitoring in all sectors. Two notable areas that the Republic of Malawi has proudly championed in relation to youth and development is the Youth Peace and Security Agenda and Youth Innovation and Entrepreneurship. To that end, we are investing in education, vocational training, and meaningful political and economic participation of our youth. We have an inclusive national peace architecture that enables women and youth to participate as negotiators, mediators, and community leaders. We have also created a Youth Innovation Fund that supports youth innovators and entrepreneurs to realize their dreams. We therefore urge the international community to create concrete pathways for youth inclusion in political and economic decision-making processes. Let us invest in their potential, not just fear their energy. To that end, the Republic of Malawi calls for investing for peace through a dedicated funding for youth-led peace building. Madam President, in closing, the Republic of Malawi reaffirms its unwavering commitment to multilateralism and to the central role of the United Nations in addressing the pressing challenges of our time. But let us be clear, noble mandates alone will not deliver results unless they are matched by the necessary resources, fairly allocated and predictably provided. Let us match our ambition with the resources required to deliver. Let us ensure fairness to those who contribute to the work of the United Nations. Let us pursue reforms that strengthen accountability and inclusivity. And let us build an organization that reflects the diversity of our membership and the hopes of our people. In this regard, Madam President, I would like to inform this Assembly that the Republic of Malawi remains resolute in her advocacy for equitable representation in the United Nations Security Council. This crucial reform is essential as it will ensure that diverse voices of capable nations are heard and considered in the decision-making processes that impact not just specific regions, such as the global north or global south, but the entire world. By fostering a more inclusive dialogue, we can collectively address pressing global challenges and promote a more just and balanced approach to international governance. No other time is suitable for this reform like now. Madam President, as we look beyond 80 years, Malawi envisions a revitalized United Nations, one that is agile, inclusive, and responsive to the needs of developing nations. The challenges of climate change, inequality, and digital transformation demand renewed collective action. In the spirit of better together, we call for a strengthened multilateral system that prioritizes peace, sustainable development, and human rights, ensuring a thriving planet for our children and grandchildren. Malawi stands ready to contribute to this shared vision, guided by our foreign policy and enduring principles of the United Nations. I thank you all.
I thank the Chair of Delegation of Malawi. I now give the floor to His Excellency Lok Bahadur Thapa, Chair of Delegation of Nepal.
Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, it is my honor to address this august assembly. At the outset, allow me to extend my warm greetings from Nepal, the land of Sagarmatha, that is Mount Everest, the highest mountains in the world, and the birthplace of Lord Buddha, the apostle of peace and compassion. I congratulate Her Excellency Annalena Baerbock on her elections as the President of the 80th sessions of the General Assembly. I assure her of Nepal's full support. I also extend our appreciation to Secretary General Antonio Guterres for his steadfast leadership in these challenging times. Mr. President, first let me share about the recent political developments in Nepal. Earlier this month, Nepali youth, particularly Gen Z, took to the street with a clear and compelling voice for change. Their call was not for narrow interest, but for a nation built on the pillars of good governance, transparent, accountable, and responsive to the people. They demanded efficient public service, end to corruption, an equitable society, justice for all, and dignified job opportunities for the youth. It was a resounding reminder that the aspirations of the generations are nothing less than a fair, just, and prosperous Nepal. In the Gen Z movement, we saw unfortunate violence that claimed lives and left deep scars in our society. Many government buildings were reduced to ashes. An interim government has been formed to steer Nepal's political directions at this critical moment. For the first time in its history, Nepal is led by a woman as Prime Minister, herself a former Chief Justice. General elections have been slated for the 5th of March 2026. This will mark another step in strengthening our democracy through fresh mandates of the sovereign people. Building our institutions, restoring trust, and healing our society will take time, resources, and solidarity. Excellencies, truly Nepal stands at a historical crossroads. And we know that the only viable road ahead of us is that of the road to peace, democracy, and inclusive development. We are determined to continue our democratic journey, and we appreciate goodwill and continued support from the international community as we move forward in these directions. Mr. President, the world itself stands at a crossroads. Peace is in peril. Militarization is mounting. Development is drifting. And the climate crisis is culminating. We have seen commitments unmet and promises unkept. In this context, the theme of these sessions, Better Together, 80 years and more for peace, development, and human rights, couldn't be more relevant. Mr. President, for 80 years, the United Nations has served as a common foundation for multilateralism, of foundations upon which all nations, big and small, developed and developing, stand equal and forge common solutions. For 80 years, our organizations has remained a beacon of hope. Hope for peace, hope for shared prosperity, hope for equity, justice, freedom, and human rights, and hope for the rule-based international order. And today, as crisis converge from climate catastrophe to widening inequality, from digital disruption to violent conflicts, that beacon must shine brighter than ever. It is time to renew our collective resolve to fortify the founding values of the United Nations. Mr. President, Nepal attaches profound enduring value to the United Nations. The UN Charter is bedrock of our foreign policy. It is a compass that guides our actions on the global stage. This reflects Nepal's enduring belief in multilateralism, international cooperation, and global solidarity, the principle that define who we are as a nation. And this year marks 70 years since Nepal joined the United Nations. For 7 decades, Nepal has consistently stood by the United Nations, contributing to global peace and stability, advocating for the rule-based international order, promoting equitable and sustainable economic development, particularly for the upliftment of the least developed countries and the landlocked developing countries, and upholding human dignity and justice. Today, Nepal proudly stands as the largest contributing country. Our highly professional peacekeepers have served with a deep sense of duty to secure peace and stability in the conflict-ridden parts of the world. Nepal remains a steadfast advocate for complete and general disarmament. The lasting peace and safer world depends on the reductions of all weapons, conventional and emerging alike. Nepal strongly condemns terrorism in all its forms and manifestations, which stands for peace, security, and the protections of innocent lives everywhere. As the chair of the Global Coordination Bureau of the least developed countries, Nepal is leading the group to ensure equitable, inclusive, and sustainable development guided by the spirit of no one is left behind. As co-facilitator of the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development, held in Sevilla, Spain, Nepal contributed to advancing key priorities, catalyzing investment for sustainable development, addressing the debt crisis, reforming the international financial architecture, and revitalizing multilateral cooperations. Nepal is deeply honored to serve as the President of the Economic and Social Council this session. We thank the member states for their trust. As the President of the ECOSOC, I am deeply committed under the motto of delivering better, to bring coherence, to bring credibility, and to bring measurable impact to the Council's work. As a member of the Peace Building Commission, Nepal is deeply committed to supporting inclusive, nationally owned, and locally driven peace-building process. Mr. President, the world today faces challenges of profound gravity and urgency. Many parts of the world are witnessing protracted crises. War is raging relentlessly in Ukraine. Suffering is deepening in Gaza, where civilians bear the heaviest toll. We support a two-state solution where Israel and Palestine and securely with internationally recognized borders in line with the relevant United Nations resolutions. Nepal is deeply concerned about the innocent civilians held hostage by Hamas. We call for the immediate release of Bipin Joshi, a Nepali student who has been held hostage by Hamas since October 7, 2023. Excellencies, crises in Sudan, Sahel, and beyond have left millions displaced, hungry, and vulnerable. The architectures of the global peace has been under severe pressure, unseen since the Second World War. Institutions designed to prevent conflict and uphold human dignity are tested as never before. It is frustrating that the defense budget is skyrocketing while development cooperation is shrinking. Global military spending has reached unprecedented $1.7 trillion in 2024, the highest since the Cold War. We have witnessed gross violations of human rights in various parts of the world. Children and most vulnerable are caught in the crossfire. Climate-driven disasters are compounding human suffering, deepening vulnerabilities, displacing communities, and straining already fragile systems. The very institutions we build to confront these global challenges are under immense strain. Confidence in multilateral frameworks is weakening. This is a clear and urgent call to reassess strengthen and revitalize our multilateral institutions, and to fortify global solidarity and actions. Mr. President, let me highlight a few areas that deserve urgent global attention. First, peace and security. Beyond words, peace demands actions. It demands courage, and it demands the commitment. In these turbulent times, dialogue must triumph over hostility, diplomacy over conflict, and cooperations over divisions. We must take urgent and coordinated actions to prevent conflict, uphold justice, and foster inclusive development. It is incumbent upon us to address the root causes of the conflicts, including poverty, inequality, and marginalizations. Second, we must strengthen multilateralism and rebuild trust. Multilateral institutions must deliver not just promises, but results. They must be representative, transparent, and accountable. In this interdependent world, no single nation, however rich and powerful, can resolve global problems alone. We must uphold multilateralism for fostering global cooperations and coordinations. We must repose our trust in multilateralism, anchored in sovereign equality, territorial integrity, and national independence. Third, accelerating the implementations of the 2030 Agenda is critical. As the progress on the Sustainable Development Goals is far off track, the world must act with greater urgency and solidarity. We strongly call for the timely and effective implementations of the Compromiso de Sovia. Sustainable investment must be boosted to deliver on our promises. Development assistance is critical for making progress in sustainable development. We appreciate the developed countries that meet the ODA target and strongly urges others to fulfill the commitment. We must make development finance adequate, easily accessible, predictable, and aligned with national priorities. Institutional and human capacity support tailored to the needs and priorities of the countries, particularly in the global south, should be prioritized. We must reform trade systems to be fair, to be inclusive, and to be responsive to the developing countries. It is incumbent upon us to address the debt burdens facing by many developing countries. Debt relief, including debt restructuring and debt swap, should be scaled up to ease debt distress. Priorities should be given to inclusive development. We must invest in youth and promote gender equality and empowerment of women and girls. The rights, safety, and dignity of migrant workers must be fully respected and protected. Fourth, climate justice and climate actions. Climate change has disproportionately affected vulnerable populations such as low-income communities and developing nations. Nepal is deeply concerned about the disproportionate impact of climate change, particularly in the mountain regions. We have first-hand experience of glaciers melting in our Himalayas that are seriously threatening the lives and livelihoods of millions downstreams. To discuss the climate crisis and chart out the way forward, we convened the Sagarmatha Samvad, that is Mount Everest Dialogue, in May this year under the theme Climate Change, Mountains and Future of Humanity. The Samvad adopted the Sagarmatha call for action, reaffirming our shared commitment to the Paris Agreement and 2030 Agenda. Nepal is proud to be among the few countries to have submitted our third nationally determined contributions, NDC 3. By 2035, We aim to reduce emissions by nearly 27% and expand renewable energy eightfold. Excellencies, as the world confronts a climate catastrophe, we must act with urgency and resolve. This is not a crisis of emissions. It is a crisis of equity, of survival, and of justice. Nepal calls for urgent, fair, and ambitious actions to protect vulnerable communities. Polluters may take responsibility with actions. We reiterate our call for scale-up, predictable, and accessible climate finance, technology transfer, and capacity building for countries on the front line, particularly the least developed countries and mountainous nations. The loss and damage fund must be capitalized, and biodiversity finance must be increased to match the scale of the crisis. Nepal urges the international community, especially developed countries, to demonstrate genuine solidarity and moral clarity by delivering on the ICJ advisory opinion and upholding their obligation to protect the climate systems. Fifth, digital transformations. Technology must be inclusive, secure, and right-based. We must narrow the digital divide within and among countries to create a peaceful and equitable society. Nepal advocates for a global digital cooperation framework that ensures access to infrastructures, digital literacy, and data protections for all. Technology transfer must be accelerated. The United Nations must be reformed to reflect the present-day realities. Focus should be laid on coherence, coordinations, and accountability across the UN development system. We need to prioritize LDCs and LLDCs across all global commitments and partnerships. The UN 80 initiative offers a timely opportunity to renew our collective commitment to a more inclusive, transparent, and effective multilateral systems. Nepal supports the reform of the United Nations Security Council to make it more representative, transparent, and accountable. The review of the ECOSOC and the high-level political forum this year presents an important moment to enhance their effectiveness, coherence, and the impact in delivering on the Sustainable Development Goals. Similarly, Nepal supports the ongoing peace-building architecture review. This is an opportunity to enhance synergy, streamline efforts, and drive results where they matter the most. We also underline that the global financial architecture must meet today's realities. Mr. President, the global community has time and again reaffirmed its determinations to tackle challenges before us. And we have shown that we can achieve more when we act in genuine partnership, when over confrontations, and when we replace disagreements with dialogue, and we are committed to peace, prosperity, and sustainable future. Mr. President, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, for 8 decades, the United Nations has stood as a beacon of hope for peace, for justice, for human rights, and for development. Today, that legacy calls upon us more urgently than ever. The world watches us at a moment of great trial. Let us stand together, united and determined to ensure enduring peace and prosperity in the world. When the United Nations succeeds, humanity as a whole succeeds. When it falters, it is the innocent and vulnerable who bear the heaviest cost. Let this 80th anniversary remind us of our shared duty to safeguard peace, to uphold justice, to protect human dignity, and to build a world that is fairer, safer, and more human for all. Nepal stands firmly committed to doing its part in shaping a safer, more prosperous, and more sustainable world. I thank you.
I thank the Chair of Delegation of Nepal. I now give the floor to His Excellency Muhammad Siat Douale, Chair of Delegation of Djibouti.
Madame la Présidente,
President,
je souhaiterais d'abord
at the outset, I would like to extend our heartfelt congratulations to Her Excellency Ms. Anna Baerbock, President of the General Assembly, at this historic session which coincides with the anniversary, the 80th anniversary of the establishment of the United Nations. The theme you've chosen for this session, Better Years and More for Peace, Development and Human Rights, edifyingly conveys the international community's patient, meticulous, painstaking quest, which it has been undertaking since the UN Charter was signed 80 years ago. We can take pride in what we've achieved and all of the successes of our organization. Despite the difficult context, nothing should dent our determination to build a world that's less unequal, that exhibits greater solidarity, a world that is more peaceful and more prosperous. We extend our gratitude to your predecessor, Mr. Philemon Yang. We're grateful for his openness, his leadership, and his ongoing efforts throughout the session that's just drawn to a close. President, Secretary General, over the last 8 decades, the role of the United Nations was pivotal in support to decolonization in Africa and Asia, as well as on conflict resolution, nuclear proliferation, the fight against poverty and climate change, the promotion of human rights, and the management of pandemic risks. The United Nations, well aware of the need to sharpen its tools, has continuously undertaken the necessary reforms so as to do an ever better job in fulfilling its mandate and responding to the challenges of our time. Under the leadership of the current Secretary General, at the request of member states, given the slow implementation of the SDGs, and with a view to building a multilateralism that's more inclusive, more effective and interconnected, we adopted the recommendations set forth in the flagship report entitled Our Common Agenda. Faced with the unpredictability of the future and the exacerbation of certain trends which could sap international cooperation, as well as the emergence of new challenges, we, as contracting parties, adopted a Pact for the Future which contains a global digital compact and a declaration on future generations. We stand convinced that we need to build a better world in which we would live better together. We agreed on an ambitious program covering important issues such as peace and security, sustainable development, climate change, digital cooperation, in particular ensuring that we make artificial intelligence a technology that benefits all, in addition to human rights, gender equality, young people, future generations, and the transformation of global governance. Nonetheless, the aforementioned accomplishments cannot conceal the devastating consequences engendered by geopolitical and geoeconomic fragmentation we're currently seeing. Conflicts are proliferating. They're dragging on in Ukraine, in Sudan, as well as in the Sahel. The unspeakable horror of what's going on in Gaza, where children are assassinated with impunity on a daily basis. where famine is being wielded as a weapon of war, while the international community is unable to effectively stop the genocide that's underway, as confirmed by the analysis report drafted by the United Nations and published on the 16th of September under the leadership of Judge Navi Pillay. The norms governing the use of force are being violated with chilling regularity, as illustrated by the bombing, the raids, and the extraterritorial assassinations committed by Israel. We condemn the terrorist attack against Qatar and the violation of its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Speaking on behalf of the Republic, His Excellency Ismail Omar Guelleh, we reiterate our solidarity with the Emir, His Highness Sheikh Tamim bin Hamad Al Thani, as well as the government and the brother people of Qatar. The Security Council is paralyzed by the recourse to the veto, which has become systematic. International law and the norms which have guided us to date are being called into question, a dangerous trend. There's also a crisis of confidence between states, aggravated by the serious liquidity crisis owing to arrears in the payment of assessed contributions. Madam President, Secretary General, the Republic of Djibouti welcomes the recent adoption of the severe commitment, an outcome document at the Financing for Development Conference, the fourth one. This agreement, in our views, is an important step in the quest towards building an international financial system that's more equitable, exhibits greater solidarity, and serves the achievement of the SDGs. The figures are as eloquent as they are alarming. The world is confronted with an annual $1 trillion shortfall when it comes to financing the SDGs. Developing countries are paying more in debt service than they're investing in health or education. In 2023, $1.4 trillion was spent on debt repayment in low and middle-income countries. Over 50 countries are today spending over 10% of their government revenues solely to reimburse their debts. In some instances, that figure exceeds 20%. As for ODA, we've seen a concerning drop in overseas development assistance. According to the latest UN reports, only 17% of targets are on track to be achieved in 2030. 37% are stagnating or in regression. None of these 17 SDGs are on its way to being fully implemented. We're seeing hunger on the rise, inequalities worsening, and the repercussions of climate change are hitting harder and harder, hitting those countries who contributed the least to this problem. Djibouti, although it's a very low emitter, is facing the disproportionate consequences of this crisis: prolonged drought, growing scarcity of water, heightened desertification, extreme heat waves, sea level rise, which is directly threatening. As recalled recently at the Second African Summit on Climate in Addis Ababa, that the urgency of the situation requires an effective adaptation strategy first and foremost. In Djibouti, the Sovereign Carbon Agency is collecting carbon contributions on the basis of the polluter pays principle, transforming them into adaptation projects for affected communities. The severe commitment gives rise to new hope. It calls for in-depth reform for financial governance that's more inclusive and better response to long-standing aspirations of the countries of the South. The commitments contained therein must be honoured. It shouldn't become just another text stored in multilateralism's archives. It should serve as a basis for a new global contract, underpinned by concrete solidarity, responsibility, and shared ambition.
Djibouti is committed to transforming its strategic, geographic, and infrastructural advantages from primarily a transit leader to a fully integrated industrial partner for East Africa and beyond. In line with its National Development Plan, Djibouti EC, we will pursue inclusive, sustainable industrialization that adds local value, create more employment and benefits its neighboring countries. Djibouti will leverage its free trade zones, ports, and logistics infrastructure to attract light manufacturing, agro-processing, packaging, and assembly industries that serve regional demand.
Djibouti is a strong believer in regional integration, where each country develops and leverages its comparative advantage to contribute to shared growth and stability. Djibouti is and will always remain a serious, reliable, committed, and constructive partner to countries in the region and its many friends all around the world. Just 2 days ago, on September the 27th, Djibouti achieved its first UNESCO Biosphere Reserve status with the designation of the Archipel des Sept Frères, Rassian, Korangar, and Godoria Biosphere Reserve. This major historic step, which underlines our country's commitment to environmental stewardship, strengthens our resolve to develop Djibouti's potential to become a premier destination for eco-tourism. Madame la Présidente,
President, Secretary General, we welcome the progress made in Somalia so as to implement national priorities, its national development program and the stabilization plan. Nonetheless, we are still disquieted by the threat that the terrorist Al-Shabaab militia continues to pose. We welcome the working legally to combat Al-Shabaab. We recognize the enormous sacrifices which have been made. We emphasize the crucial importance of guaranteeing that AUSOM African forces are endowed with predictable, sufficient resources so that they can fulfill their mandate under the best possible conditions. Djibouti is a large contributor of the African Union in Somalia since the ATMIS mission. Our troops are stationed in key sectors, Beledweyne, Bulahawa, and Jalalakaksi, in the Haran region in the state of Hir Shabelle. Faced with an uptick in terrorist attacks, Djibouti heeded Somalia's call by signing a new agreement in July 2025 to pave the way for additional deployments of Djiboutian forces to reinforce stabilization efforts in the country. We must provide collectively robust support to the government of Somalia so as to facilitate their efforts. We cannot accept that these terrorist militias continue their deadly campaign against civilians, Somali forces and international partners. We cannot accept that they are closing humanitarian corridors. President, Secretary General, we are deeply disquieted by the ongoing hostilities in Sudan, where a fratricidal conflict has been raging for over 2 years now. The death toll is heavy. Civilian infrastructure has been destroyed, which is very costly, resulting in the disruption of essential services being provided such as water, health and electricity. The ongoing deterioration of the security and humanitarian situation is prompting large-scale displacement. Sudan, which has over 30 million people in need of assistance, according to UN figures, is confronted with a disastrous humanitarian situation, which demands an immediate coordinated response on the part of the international community. We call for an immediate cessation of military operations and for a lasting ceasefire, echoing previous regional resolutions which aim to resolve the conflict. Djibouti reaffirms its commitment to the sovereignty, territorial integrity, and the national unity, as well as the stability of Sudan, in accordance with regional and international commitments. We reiterate our willingness to work in partnership with regional and international actors who wish to find a peaceful way out of the crisis. We call to place the interests of the Sudanese people, as well as regional stability, at the heart of our efforts at all times. Madam President, when the United Nations Charter was signed, when the United Nations was established, the international community was drawing on the lessons it learned from the League of Nations. It committed to do everything within its power to spare humanity from the scourge of another war. it would appear that the promise of a war-free world was not upheld, given that, regrettably, today we continue to face a number of conflict situations, some of which are particularly horrific. The most devastating conflict, as old as the United Nations itself, is Israel's ongoing aggression and occupation of Palestinian land. The unspeakable horrors occurring there requires pressing action on the part of the international community, going beyond words and condemnation, which has no repercussions. In Gaza and in the West Bank, Israelis are engaged in what would appear an innocent pastime, killing. Meanwhile, the international community is working to revitalize the two-state solution. As for Israel, it is busy burying not only the very idea of two states, but also any future possibility of a viable and sovereign Palestinian state. Israel's most fervent wish is to compromise the two-state solution, to bury peace under the rubble of colonization and militarization. But without a doubt, their mission is bound to fail. The Palestinian people is a resilient, a dauntless people. The international community is equally determined, as demonstrated by the resolution adopted by a large majority of member states, as well as by the very encouraging results of the international conference held on the 22nd of September, co-chaired by Saudi Arabia and France. We'll never say it enough. The two-state solution is the only solution that can satisfy the legitimate aspirations of the Palestinian people and to usher in lasting peace. Djibouti encourages the efforts underway so that they can produce the outcomes we hope for.
Madam Judge Navi Pillay admonished, the Security Council must not be the graveyard of conscience, and to this, President Gele recently added, neither must the General Assembly nor any of its member states. Madam President, Mr. Secretary General, the dispute concerning the Ras Dumeira area and Dumeira Island and Mount Dumeira and the land/maritime border with Eritrea, as well as the situation of its prisoners of war held incommunicado, remain unresolved. As we did in previous years, we renew our readiness to work with our neighbors in order to find a peaceful and negotiated solution on the reaffirms in this anniversary year, when we celebrate the 80th anniversary of the signing of the Charter of the United Nations, and as required by Article 33 of this fundamental document, is proposal to negotiate either through bilateral means, mediation, conciliation, recourse to the International Court of Justice, or arbitration manner. Madame la Présidente, Monsieur le Secrétaire
Madam President,
Général,
Secretary General,
les Nations Unies, 80 ans après
80
sa création,
years after
continue
its
d'offrir une
establishment, the United
plateforme et des
Nations
outils
continues
adéquats
to serve as
que
a
nous
forum
pouvons
and to
affiner
provide
davantage,
adequate
bien
tools
sûr,
which we could
afin de
further
mieux vivre ensemble
refine, of
et
course,
répondre aux
allowing
défis
us
complexes
to
auxquels notre monde
live
fait
together
face
better
en matière de
and
paix et
to
de
tackle the
sécurité
complex
collective, de
challenges
développement et
our
de
world
droits humains.
faces, those
Nous
related to
devons
peace and
tout
security,
mettre
utmost to ensure that the United Nations
Vigilance
doesn't
sur son
remain
image,
a symbolic
mais
theatre
sourd aux
safeguarding its
exigences de
image,
réforme,
but
y
deaf
compris celles du
to the
Conseil de
demands for
sécurité,
reform, including
en
Security Council
accordant
reform,
à l'Afrique
which
la
requires
place qu'elle mérite, réparant ainsi
the granting
une
to
injustice
Africa of the
historique.
seat it deserves,
Nations
thereby
Unies
righting a
demeurent
historical
plus que
injustice.
jamais
The United
essentielles.
Nations is
Nous ne devons pas
more
en faire une
essential than
victime
ever.
expiatoire,
We shouldn't turn it into a
sacrifiée
sacrificial
sur
victim,
l'autel de nos
a
différences
victim
et notre
sacrificed on the
incapacité
altar of
à
our
instaurer entre
differences
nous des liens de
and our
confiance
inability to bind ourselves
Nous devons
to each other
travailler
with
ensemble
strong
afin de
bonds of
donner
trust.
au
We should
multilatéralisme
work
un
together
sens
to inject
renouvelé
new meaning
et
into
renforcer la
multilateralism
coopération
and to strengthen
internationale
international
dans l'intérêt
cooperation
de tous les
in the
États,
interests of all
petits
states,
et grands. Je vous remercie.
small and large alike. I thank you.
I thank the Chair of Delegation of Djibouti. I now give the floor to Her Excellency Christina Marcus Larsen, Chair of Delegation of Denmark.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, distinguished delegates, friends, and colleagues. 80 years ago, representatives from around the globe came together to establish the United Nations. My country, Denmark, was part of that historic moment. But many other nations were not given that opportunity. In 1945, the world was still a world of empires that were not free to choose their own political destiny. The establishment of the United Nations did not change that overnight. Yet, it set the world on a course toward a radically different order. An order based on the equal rights and self-determination of peoples and of nations, large and small, a rules-based international order. As this order grew into being, the world saw tremendous progress. More than 1 billion people were lifted out of poverty, standards of living and life expectancies rose, a network of economic, political, social, and cultural relations across the globe were formed. It even seemed that wars between states were becoming a thing of the past. In recent years, this path has been broken. Wars are back. Extreme poverty is on the rise. International law is under pressure. Does this mean that the United Nations has become irrelevant? Of course not. The conclusion is the opposite. The UN is as essential as ever. Without the UN, the world would be in a much worse state. But as the world is changing, so must the United Nations. Excellencies, last year we agreed on the Pact for the Future. We committed to updating global governance, doing away with historical injustices of the existing system, expanding the Security Council and reforming the international financial architecture, bringing about a system that delivers for all. This year, the Secretary-General presented his UN 80 reform initiative. I thank the Secretary-General for his bold act of leadership. I encourage and expect more concrete proposals on how to adopt the UN system to new realities, making hard choices. And I ask fellow member states to engage constructively in the process. Excellencies, as an elected member of the Security Council, Denmark works towards ensuring that the Council fulfills its vital mandate towards safeguarding international law, including international humanitarian law, and ensuring that the voices of those affected by conflict are heard by the Council. At times, we succeed with fellow members through a shared sense of purpose. Too often, however, results are not possible. Too often, the Security Council is divided, unable or unwilling to act. The costs of inactions are felt around the world, from the raging war in Sudan to the erasure of women's rights in Afghanistan, from the spiraling gang violence in Haiti to the crisis in Myanmar, to the instability across the Sahel, not to mention the horrible situation in Gaza. Almost 2 years have passed since the horrific terrorist attack by Hamas on October 7, 2023, an attack that tore through Israeli families and left the nation wounded to its core. Denmark has repeatedly and consistently condemned the attack and called for the immediate release of all hostages. We've also said from day one that Israel has a right to self-defense. But what is going on in Gaza right now has nothing to do with self-defense. A man-made famine is spreading. Thousands of civilians are being killed. The humanitarian catastrophe is of unbearable scale. It must be brought to an end immediately. Israel must comply with international law, including international humanitarian law. The war in Gaza needs to stop. The two-state solution remains the only solution to a lasting peace for two peoples, both deserving of security, both deserving of dignity. The high-level conference on the two-state solution last Monday clearly demonstrated that the momentum is growing, that we are witnessing a renewed energy and enthusiasm for peace based on the two-state solution, a solution that Denmark is prepared to build on. The keys to recognition of a Palestinian state can no longer lie in the hands of the Israeli government. The Palestinians themselves must become masters of their own destiny. Excellencies, in Ukraine, Russia's horrific and illegal war of choice continues. A war that could end tomorrow if only Russia wanted to. If only Russia would withdraw to its own territory and refrain from trying to alter international borders by force. Russia's blatant violation of the UN Charter is felt most intensely in Ukraine and in Europe. Yet, its political and economic repercussions are felt across the world, from the disruption of supply chains to global inflation, costs that are borne primarily by developing countries, far away from the European battlefield of Russian creation. From the outset, Denmark has stood by Ukraine, politically, economically, militarily, and let there be no doubt, Denmark will continue to support Ukraine for as long as it takes. We must support Ukraine's military as it fights to protect its people, its territory, and its freedom. This is exactly what Denmark is doing through a range of initiatives. We call on others to step up and do the same. Because Ukraine is not just fighting for its own existence. It is fighting to defend the very principle that define the UN-based world order. Territorial integrity, national sovereignty, and the right to political independence. Let us never forget that Russia is the aggressor. Russia's repeated violations of European airspace with aircrafts and drones underline Russia's insistence on staying on a path of war. So, colleagues, I ask you, are these the actions of a country generally committed to peace? Excellencies, our collective inability to halt the killings, suffering, and injustices in Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan, and beyond must not prompt us to submit to a world ruled by brute force. On the contrary, it must inspire us to work harder, to sustain the instruments and mechanisms we have built over the last 80 years. To Denmark, this includes maintaining our firm support for the International Court of Justice and the International Criminal Court as core international justice institutions. We do believe that this is paramount. It also includes maintaining our firm support for the Sustainable Development Goals. With only 5 years to 2030, we are still far from reaching those goals, and the financing gap is widening. For 45 years, Denmark has delivered on the UN target of 0.7% in official development assistance. We call on other fellow member states to join us, not as an act of altruism, but as a long-term investment in our shared future. Excellencies, in a world of competing crises, climate change and its impact remain real. Flooding, drought, heat waves, Again, the costs of inaction are felt across the world, and particularly in developing countries. The COP30 climate summit in Brazil will be a decisive moment. The benefits of the green transition are evident. Demand for clean technology is on the rise. In 2024, more than 90% of new power added to the world's grid came from renewable energy. Green transition is not only good for the planet, but also for investments, innovation, jobs, competitiveness, and resilience. So sometimes all good things really do go together. Excellencies, building on a livable planet for future generations is not just about nature or resources. It's about people. Defending human rights is as essential as today as it was in 1945. Perhaps ever more so, as the pressure is growing, especially on the rights of women and girls. To Denmark, it is evident that gender equality is not only the right thing to do, it is the smart thing to do. That is also why Denmark, as we look to the upcoming process of selecting a new Secretary General for the United Nations, is encouraging member states to put forward qualified female candidates. After 80 years, it is high time for a woman to be at the helm of this organization. Excellency, in closing, I would like to recall the wisdom of Nelson Mandela. It always seems impossible until it is done. When we compare the world of today to the world of 1945, the progress is evident. Empires have been dismantled. Millions have been lifted out of poverty. The equal rights of all human beings and of nations large and small have been recognized. In a world of rapid change and growing uncertainty, we must not lose sight of how far we have come, nor must we forget that it was by working together we got here. Let us rekindle the spirit of cooperation that led to the establishment of the United Nations 80 years ago. It always seems impossible until it is done. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the chair of the delegation of Denmark. I now give the floor to His Excellency Marc Hermanje Nadudu Araba, chair of the delegation of Benin.
Madame la Présidente, Monsieur le Secrétaire général des Nations Unies, Mesdames et Messieurs les chefs de délégation, distingués délégués, Mesdames et Messieurs, c'est avec un profond sentiment d'honneur et de responsabilité que je prends la parole. Au nom de Son Excellence Patrice Talon,
President of the Republic
à
of
l'occasion
Benin,
de la 80e
on the occasion of this
Assemblée générale des
80th
Nations
session
Unies.
of the United Nations General
Je
Assembly.
tiens à adresser tout d'abord
I wish to
mes plus
first and
chaleureuses
foremost
félicitations
extend
à
my
Madame
warmest
Annalena
congratulations
Baerbock pour sa
to
brillante
Ms.
élection à la
Annalena
présidence de cette
Baerbock
session
on her outstanding
et
election to
l'assurer
preside
du
over
plein
this
soutien
session.
de ma
I
délégation
wish
dans
her that she,
l'accomplissement de sa noble
I assure
mission.
her that she will have the full support of my
Je
delegation in
souhaite
discharge of her noble mission.
saluer
I'd
l'engagement
also like
constant
to
de M.
commend the
Antonio
unwavering
Guterres,
commitment of Mr.
secrétaire
Antonio
général des
Guterres,
Nations Unies,
United
pour ses
Nations
efforts
Secretary
infatigables
General,
en faveur de la
for
paix,
his
de la
indefatigable
sécurité,
efforts in
du
favor
développement
of
durable et du
peace,
respect des droits humains
security, sustainable
dans un
development, and
contexte
respect for
mondial
human rights
marqué
in
par
a
des
global
incertitudes
context
croissantes
marked by
et des crises
mounting
multiples.
uncertainties and multiple crises.
En ce moment de
At this time,
célébration du
in which we
jubilé
are
de chêne de notre
celebrating
organisation
the Oak
commune,
Jubilee of our
il me
common
paraît opportun de
organization,
procéder
I
à un
believe
bilan
it's
critique de
timely
ces
to
résultats
conduct an
en
assessment
vue de
of
dégager des
its
perspectives
progress
pour un
in
monde
charting the
meilleur et
path
de paix.
towards a better and
Nous
more
nous
peaceful
réunissons
world.
cette année dans un climat
meet this
international lourdement
in
assombri
a
par la multiplication des
international
foyers de
climate that is
tension,
heavily overshadowed by the
l'aggravation des crises
proliferation of
humanitaires et
hotbeds of
climatiques,
tension, worsening
l'accroissement des
humanitarian and
inégalités,
climate crises,
ainsi que
creeping
par l'érosion de
inequality,
la
as well
confiance
as
dans
the
les
erosion of
institutions
trust in multilateral
multilatérales.
institutions.
Ces défis,
These challenges, which are unfolding around the planet, severely test our collective ability to preserve peace, to promote shared prosperity, and to protect human dignity.
Ce contexte mondial fort agité
This
justifie pleinement la
tumultuous
pertinence
global
du thème
context fully
principal du débat général
confirms
de la présente
the
session,
relevance of the topic
Mieux
chosen
ensemble,
for this general
plus de
debate,
80 ans
Better
au
Together,
service de la
80
paix,
years and more for
du
peace,
développement et des
development,
droits humains.
and human rights.
Pour le Bénin,
For
il
Benin,
n'existe qu'une seule réponse
there
à
is
ces
but
défis.
one answer to these challenges:
Renforcer la coopération internationale,
enhancing international
revitaliser
cooperation,
le
breathing new
multilatéralisme
life into
et redonner
multilateralism,
tout son
and
sens à
restoring
la
the
solidarité
full
entre les
meaning
peuples.
of solidarity among peoples.
Madame la Présidente, nous sommes aujourd'hui à un
Madam
moment
President,
charnière de l'histoire
we stand
contemporaine.
today at a critical
Le monde
juncture
tel
in
que nous
contemporary
le
history.
connaissions se
The
transforme
world
sous
as we
l'effet de
knew it is being
mutations profondes,
transformed by profound
notamment la
shifts,
recomposition
in
des équilibres
particular the
stratégiques,
reshaping of strategic
l'accélération
balances,
technologique,
fast-paced
la crise
technological
climatique,
development,
la
the
montée des
climate crisis,
interdépendances, mais aussi
rising
la rivalité.
interdependence, but also
Ces changements ne sont
rivalries.
pas de simples
These
ajustements
are not
conjoncturels,
merely
mais annoncent un nouvel
cyclical
ordre
adjustments,
géopolitique
rather they
mondial.
augur a new
Nous sommes témoins
global
d'un glissement
geopolitical order.
progressif vers un monde
We are
multipolaire.
witnessing a gradual
De nouvelles
shift
puissances
towards a
émergent,
multipolar world.
affirmant
New
leur droit
powers
dans les
are
affaires
emerging,
internationales,
asserting their
tandis
voice
que
in
les
international
alliances stratégiques
affairs,
se redessinent.
while strategic alliances
Cette
are being
dynamique
redrawn.
ouvre des
This
perspectives de
dynamic
rééquilibrage,
provides
mais
opportunity
comporte
for
également des risques de
rebalancing, but
fragmentation.
also carries with it risks of
Ma délégation
fragmentation.
souligne
My delegation
que ce nouveau
stresses
monde en
that this
gestation ne devrait
nascent
pas conduire les États
world
de dimension
shouldn't
modeste
relegate
à être
smaller-sized
relégués au rôle de
states
simples
to the role
spectateurs,
of mere
ni
bystanders,
disparaître dans le
nor
fracas
drown
des
them out
rivalités
under the
des puissances.
commotion of great power
voix
rivalries.
Nos
Our voices
expériences
matter,
comptent,
our experiences
nos
matter,
solutions
our
comptent.
solutions matter.
L'histoire de cette
The history of
organisation,
this
fondée sur le principe
organization,
de
founded on
l'égalité
the
souveraine
principle
des
of
États,
the sovereign equality
nous
of
a maintes
states,
fois démontré que
has
les acteurs de taille
oft
modeste sont
demonstrated
généralement
that
des
smaller
points
actors
d'équilibre
are
grâce à
very
leur
often
capacité
able to
à
act as
incarner la mesure,
counterbalances thanks to
le
their
dialogue
ability to
et la
embody
coopération
restraint, dialogue,
qui
and
sont l'essence même
cooperation,
du
the
multilatéralisme.
very essence of
Mon
multilateralism.
pays, le Bénin,
My country,
conçoit sa
Benin,
place dans ce
perceives its
nouvel
space,
ordre
its place
mondial
in this
comme
new
celle
global
d'un
order
acteur
as
de
that of
stabilité et de
a
coopération,
stabilizing and
c'est-à-dire
cooperative
une
force,
force de
a
proposition
font of
qui n'a nulle
proposals,
prétention de vouloir
which does not
déterminer la politique du
aspire
monde, mais
to decide
qui a
global
sur les grands
policy,
défis
which,
que nous sommes appelés
but
à relever
which,
ensemble,
in
une
terms of the
vision à
great challenges that
partager.
we have to meet together,
Notre
has
politique
a vision to
extérieure se
share.
fonde sur le respect
To disputes.
Nous croyons que la
We
force du
believe
droit
that
doit toujours
the
prévaloir
rule
sur le droit
of
de la force.
law must always
Nous
prevail
privilégions
over
les
the rule
vertus
of
de la
force.
diplomatie préventive,
We favour the
la
virtues of
médiation et
preventive
la
diplomacy,
construction de
mediation,
consensus au sein des
and consensus
organisations
building
régionales
within
et
regional and
internationales.
international organizations.
Héritier d'une histoire plurielle,
Heir of a
nous défendons la
plural
diversité
history,
culturelle
we
comme pilier de la
support
paix
cultural
mondiale
diversity as a
et
pillar
œuvrons
of
à
global
reconnecter
peace.
l'Afrique avec
We
ses
strive to
diasporas
reconnect
en
Africa
offrant
with its
notamment aux
diaspora
Afro-descendants qui le
by,
souhaitent
in
la
particular,
nationalité
offering
béninoise par
Beninese
reconnaissance.
nationality as a gesture of recognition to
Dans ce
Afro-descendants who
nouvel
wish to claim it.
ordre mondial en gestation, la
In this
question de la
new global order
souveraineté
in the
nationale
making,
revient
the
au
issue of
premier plan
national
des
sovereignty
débats.
has returned to the forefront
À
of our
travers le monde,
debates. All
les
around the
nations
world,
réaffirment leur
nations
droit
are reaffirming
légitime
their
de
legitimate
décider de leur
right to
destin,
decide on their
de
own
protéger leurs
path, to
intérêts
protect
vitaux et de
their
préserver leur
vital
intégrité
interests and to
territoriale.
preserve their territorial
Cette
integrity.
aspiration est légitime,
This
car
aspiration
elle
is
repose sur le droit
legitimate. It is
international,
rooted in international
la Charte des
law,
Nations
in the
Unies et
United
la
Nations
volonté des peuples.
Charter, and in the will of the
Mais,
peoples.
en même temps,
Nonetheless,
cette
at
quête
the
de
same time,
souveraineté
this
est
quest for
parfois
sovereignty
interprétée comme
is
un appel
sometimes
au repli
interpreted
et à la
as a
fermeture.
call for
Pour le
isolationism
Bénin,
and closure.
la souveraineté rime plutôt
Rather,
avec une
Benin
capacité
sees
d'action
sovereignty as
autonome,
synonymous with
adossée
an
à une
ability to
vision
act
claire des intérêts
independently,
nationaux et
underpinned by a
s'exerce
clear
dans le
understanding
cadre
of
d'un
national
système
interest.
international où chaque
It is to
État,
be exercised in
tout en
the
restant
context of
maître
an
de ses
international
choix,
system in which every
reconnaît que les
state,
défis
while
communs
remaining the
exigent des
master of
réponses
their own choices,
collectives.
recognizes that
La
common challenges demand collective responses. True sovereignty is also visible in the capacity to engage in dialogue, to negotiate, to cooperate, and to be open to the world. Madam President, Benin observes with concern the proliferation of armed conflicts in Eastern Europe, the Middle East, Sahel, and the Great Lakes region, threatening millions of lives, triggering mass population displacements, weakening institutions, and destroying infrastructure. This, in turn, fuels a cycle of poverty and violence in affected areas. In light of this reality, we have a clear belief.
Ne peut trouver de solution durable par la force
conflict can be
des armes.
sustainably resolved by the force of weapons.
Un dialogue
Only an
inclusif,
inclusive
soutenu par une
dialogue
volonté
backed
politique
by
réelle et
true
accompagné d'un
political
engagement
determination,
international cohérent,
along with
peut
sustained
ouvrir la voie à
international
une paix
engagement,
juste et
can
durable,
open the way
en
to
particulier dans
just
le
and
chaos
lasting
humanitaire à
peace,
Gaza,
perhaps in
où les
particular in the
perspectives de
humanitarian
reconstruction
chaos in
semblent
Gaza,
incertaines.
where the prospects for
Le
reconstruction
Bénin
appear
réaffirme son soutien à la solution
uncertain.
à deux États
Benin reaffirms
comme
its
la
support
seule
for the
option
two-state
viable
solution as
pour
the
un
only
règlement
viable
définitif du
path
conflit
towards a
israélo-palestinien,
lasting settlement of the
conformément
Israeli-Palestinian
aux
conflict,
résolutions
in
pertinentes
accordance
du
with
Conseil
the
de
relevant
sécurité
resolutions of the
et à la
Security
déclaration de
Council
New York,
and the New York
adoptée au thème de
Declaration,
la conférence
adopted at the
internationale
conclusion of the international
organisée par la
conference
France et le Royaume d'Arabie
organized
Saoudite
jointly
en
by
juillet
France and the Kingdom of
2025.
Saudi Arabia in July this
Le
year.
Bénin suit également avec une
Benin
vive
is
préoccupation
also following
l'évolution
with
de la
great
crise dans l'Est de
concern
la République
the
démocratique du Congo,
developments in the crisis
marquée par la
in the
persistance
Eastern
des violences
DRC,
malgré
marked
les
by
récentes
persistent
initiatives
violence
diplomatiques.
despite recent diplomatic
Nous saluons les
initiatives.
efforts du Qatar et des
We
États-Unis
commend
d'Amérique
the efforts of Qatar and the
visant
United
à
States of
favoriser
America
la
to promote
désescalade et à ouvrir
de-escalation
des
and to
perspectives de
open the way
dialogue
to
inclusif.
an inclusive dialogue.
Nous invitons
We
les
call
parties
on
prenantes à
the
faire taire les armes
parties
et
to
encourageons
silence
l'Union
the guns,
africaine
and
à
we
assurer
encourage
la
the African
cohérence
Union
stratégique,
to ensure
la
consistent
complémentarité
strategies,
opérationnelle et l'alignement
complementary
des efforts de
operations,
paix dans
and
la région des
coordinated
Grands
peace
Lacs.
efforts in the Great Lakes
Le Bénin
region.
plaide pour que
Benin
la diplomatie préventive
is in favor
retrouve
of
toute sa
preventive
place dans
diplomacy
l'action de
regaining
notre
its rightful
organisation.
place in the work of our organization.
Prévenir un conflit coûte
Preventing a
toujours moins
conflict
cher,
is always less
humainement,
costly in
financièrement,
human and
que d'en
financial
gérer les
terms
conséquences, comme c'est le cas dans
than
notre sous-région, qui fait, hélas,
grappling with
actuellement
its
face à la
consequences.
menace
This is
du
the case in our
terrorisme,
sub-region, which
de
is currently
l'extrémisme violent
facing
et de
the
la
threat of
criminalité
terrorism, violent
transnationale.
extremism, and
La situation dans la partie
transborder crime.
septentrionale de mon
The
pays,
situation in the
qui
north
subit
of
les
my
attaques de
country, which
mouvements
is under attack from
terroristes,
terrorist movements,
notamment du JNIM dans la
particularly
zone du
JNIM
point
in the
frontalière avec les
tri-border
pays du
area
Sahel
with
est
countries of the
critique.
Sahel, is critical.
Le gouvernement y fait face
The government
avec
is addressing
détermination,
this
avec l'appui
decisively
des
with
partenaires
the support of
internationaux,
international
à
partners
travers une stratégie
through an
inclusive
inclusive
combinant
strategy
sécurité renforcée
combining
aux frontières,
reinforced border
initiatives de développement
security,
communautaire,
community
prise
development
en charge des
initiatives,
déplacés internes et
assistance to
réfugiés,
internally
couplée à des
displaced
programmes de
persons
prévention
and
de la
refugees,
radicalisation.
together with radicalization
Le
prevention
terrorisme est une
programs.
menace transnationale.
Terrorism
Et
is
sans
a
une
transnational
coopération
threat,
stratégique
and
et un
without
renforcement
strategic
de la confiance
cooperation
mutuelle
and
entre les
strengthened
pays,
mutual
les
trust
efforts
between
nationaux
countries,
pour y faire
national
face
efforts
se
alone
révèlent,
are,
hélas,
alas,
très
insufficient.
Par ailleurs, la paix ne
Furthermore,
peut être préservée que
peace
si elle
can
repose sur
only
la
be
justice et
preserved
le respect du
if
droit
it is
international.
underpinned by justice
implique
and respect for international
que tous les
law.
États membres
This
s'acquittent
means
de
that
leurs
all member
obligations,
states must meet their
respectent la
obligations,
souveraineté des
must
nations
respect
et renoncent
national
à toute
sovereignty,
ingérence
and renounce
ou
any
agression.
form of interference or aggression.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam
il y a
President,
10 ans, la
10 years ago, the
communauté
international community
internationale
adopted
adoptait
the
l'agenda 2030 pour le
2030
développement
Agenda
durable,
for Sustainable Development,
porteur de l'ambitieuse
embodying
promesse de ne
the
laisser
ambitious
personne de côté.
pledge to leave no one behind.
Aujourd'hui, nous devons faire face
Today,
à une réalité
we must face
préoccupante,
a
à
troublesome
savoir que la
reality,
trajectoire
that
mondiale
is,
d'atteinte
that
des
the
ODD
global
est
trajectory
gravement
towards
compromise.
achieving the SDGs is
Les
seriously
chocs
off track.
successifs,
Successive
pandémie de la
shocks,
Covid,
the
crise
COVID-19
sécuritaire,
pandemic, security
effets exacerbés des
crises,
changements
the
climatiques,
exacerbated
tensions
effects
géopolitiques
of
et
climate
ralentissement
change,
économique
geopolitical
ont freiné,
tensions, and an
voire
economic
inversé
slowdown
dans de
have
nombreux
stalled
pays,
or even
notamment en
reversed
Afrique
progress in
subsaharienne.
many countries, particularly in
Des progrès.
sub-Saharan Africa.
Malgré ces défis,
Despite these
le
challenges, Benin,
sous le leadership
under
du
the
président
leadership of President
a
Patrice
entrepris des
Talon, has
réformes profondes et
undertaken
mobilisé des
profound
investissements
reforms and has
stratégiques visant à
galvanized
transformer
strategic
durablement
investment to
l'économie
sustainably transform our economy and improve the living conditions of our citizens. We have seen some considerable results in terms of the SDGs, with more than almost 60% of our 49 priority targets on track. The 2025 SDG index for Benin is 57.8 points, which means that our country stands first worldwide in terms of progress, with a gain of 14.5 percentage points since 2015. These positive results speak to Benin's ability to transform our public policies into tangible progress for our population. And yet a number of challenges remain to be met in order to consolidate the gains made and to bridge gaps. We therefore call for collective mobilization with less than 5 years to go before the end of the 2030 agenda. This calls for renewed multilateral action to ensure that the Seville commitment is consistently implemented. This was adopted at the 4th International Conference on Financing for Development. We call for a deep-rooted reform of the international financial architecture and of governance of multilateral development institutions, so that they can better include countries of the South in their decision-making processes and modernize their financial instruments in line with new challenges related to the energy transition, social inclusion, and climate resilience. Furthermore, achieving the SDGs demands that considering young people and women as more than mere beneficiaries, rather as genuine partners in change. In Benin, more than 65% of the population is under 30 years of age. Investing in their potential is not only a demographic imperative, but rather a strategic choice to Likewise, women's empowerment is a major lever for social and economic progress, guaranteeing shared equitable growth. With this in mind, the government of Benin, in partnership with the United Nations Population Fund, hosted the Global Youth Summit in Cotonou on the 4th and 5th of April 2024. On the 30th and 31st of July this year, the same city, Cotonou, hosted the annual coordination meeting of the African Union and its member states on strengthening the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security agenda in the context of the 25th anniversary of the adoption of Resolution 1325 by the UN Security Council. Madam President, in light of the current malaise in multilateralism resulting from geopolitical rivalries, the resurgence of power politics, and a nationalist retrenchment, Benin calls for a collective leap forward to breathe new life into multilateralism, making it more inclusive and action-oriented. In this context, my delegation takes note of the UN 80 initiative launched by the Secretary General. Here we wish to stress on the following points. Stress the following points. 1. The UN 80 initiative must be transparent and accountable. It must ultimately aim to improve UN mandate delivery in the interest of its member states. 2. Ensuring a better response to the organization's recurrent liquidity problems falls first and foremost to member states, who must honor their financial obligations in full, on time and without conditions. Finally, any proposal to achieve efficiency gains by reducing duplication and redundancies across the UN system shouldn't result in dismantling UN agencies or funds to the detriment of the assistance provided to member states. Finally, Benin would like to underscore the urgent need for a thorough reform of the UN Security Council. This is a requirement in light of the 21st century's geopolitical realities. It's essential to build on the outcomes of the Summit for the Future last year, particularly the Pact for the Future, which contains commitments on the Council's enlargement. Benin reaffirms here its support for the common African position set out in the Ezzolwini Consensus and the Sirte Declaration. Africa, which represents more than 1/4 of member states, and which is the theatre of a number of issues on the Council's agenda, can no longer be sidelined in decision-making. Allow me to conclude by citing the African aphorism: if you want to go faster, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. May this maxim guide our steps, inspire our decisions, and unite us in our quest for a better future for all of humanity. Thank you.
I thank the chair of the delegation of Benin. I now give the floor to His Excellency Odo Tevi, chair of the delegation of Vanuatu.
Madam President, Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great honor for me to deliver this address on behalf of the government and people of the Republic of Vanuatu. Madam President, at the outset, let me sincerely congratulate you on your well-deserved election as President of the 80th session of this August Assembly. I assure you of the Vanuatu's delegation full support and cooperation during your tenure. I commend your predecessor, His Excellency Mr. Philemon Yang, for the great achievements of the General Assembly under his leadership during these challenging times. I would also like to extend my sincere congratulations to the Secretary General, Mr. Antonio Guterres, for his continued vision, wisdom, and skillful leadership of the United Nations during these tumultuous times. Madam President, since the setup of the United Nations 80 years ago, we have seen that the world continues to face a myriad of global complex challenges. There are ongoing wars and violent conflicts, increased humanitarian emergencies, international laws are not respected, human rights violations increased, and poverty continues to remain. The current liquidity crisis facing the United Nations system limits the ability of the UN to address these challenges. As we celebrate the 80th anniversary of the United Nations Charter, let us take stock of what this founding document really means for us. The Charter is not merely a piece of history. It is a living document that binds us together in the pursuit of peace, human dignity, and shared prosperity. It is the expression of a collective promise that disputes should be resolved by dialogue, not by war, that human rights and dignity are universal, and that nations, large and small, are equal in sovereignty. Madam President, your theme, Better Together, 80 years, more for peace, development, and human rights, is crucial at this time. The lesson of the last 80 years is clear. No nation can meet these challenges alone. Multilateralism is not a choice, it is a necessity. Better Together is not only a theme, but a guiding principle that we must work together to create a just, fair, and prosperous world. Madam President, the Prime Minister of Vanuatu, in his 45th Independence Commemoration speech on 30th of July this year, called on our people to renew unity, national harmony, and long-term vision, to hold fast to the values of faith, culture, and shared purpose, especially in times of challenge. That same spirit must guide our engagement in New York today. Small island states like ours cannot face climate change, global insecurity, or technical disruptions alone. Our independence reminds us that sovereignty is precious, but so too is solidarity. In the past few years, we have experienced a number of Category 4 to 5 cyclones, which have contributed to the erosion of around 30 to 60% of our economy. Moreover, in early December 17, 2024, we experienced a devastating earthquake in our capital that damaged our infrastructure and buildings. The cumulative effect of these disasters are huge. Each disaster erodes our infrastructure, displaces communities, and sets back economic and social progress. Recovery is slow, and our resilience is tested. The compounding nature of this crisis makes adaptations and preparations ever more urgent. And yet, as a small island developing state, Vanuatu faces limitations in resources, capacity, and access to finance. Apart from these disasters, foreign investments in our country have been flat, and this is due to a combination of factors, one of which is the unjust blacklisting imposed by some of our development partners and the difficulty of accessing funds due to the worsening of corresponding banking relationship. While these measures are often justified as steps towards de-risking, the consequences for a country like Vanuatu are severe. We call on the international community, financial institutions, and regulators to work with countries that are affected by these measures and to recognize the unintended consequences of de-risking in small economies. Solutions must include enhanced dialogue, technical assistance, and proportionate risk-based approaches that allow bona fide businesses and citizens to continue to participate in global commerce. Despite these challenges, we are starting to see some green shoots in our economy. Our economy is anticipated to recover this year and in the medium term. Of course, our growth prospects, among other things, will depend on a favorable external and domestic economic environment and how far we can withstand natural disasters in the future. Our development experience thus far reveals that as a vulnerable country which has graduated from least developing country status, it is not easy to chart your own course for development. The international environment has been unfavorable for small island developing states, and accessing climate and development finance continues to be challenging. The securitization of development finance makes it difficult to address our most pressing development challenges. Just like any other small island developing states, Vanuatu relies on the current global legal order that is underpinned by the UN Charter to thrive. As a nation, we will continue to espouse for the preservation of these ideals. Furthermore, we call for the UN to urgently look deeper into the challenges of states like Vanuatu and find innovative ways to assist them. Madam President, this year the Pacific leaders established the Pacific Resilience Facility, which aims to support climate projects that would build resilience in our economies and communities in the Pacific. This is one of the first regional-led initiatives of its kind in the world. I join our Pacific leaders to thank our development partners that have contributed to this initiative. I call on our good friends and partners to contribute further to this facility. Madam President, as you are well aware, Vanuatu, with the support of a coalition of nations, led a UN resolution which was adopted by the UN General Assembly in March 2023, calling for the International Court of Justice to provide an advisory opinion on climate change. The court delivered its historic opinion in July 2025, affirming that states have clear legal obligations to protect the environment and human rights from the impacts of this crisis. For vulnerable nations, including small island developing states, this opinion is a powerful affirmation of a long-standing call that climate change is an existential threat and that the world has a legal duty to respond. Now that the advisory opinion is rendered, Vanuatu will take a follow-up resolution this year to the UN General Assembly to affirm the findings of the court and propose actions for the opinion to be operationalized. I call upon all the UN member states to support this crucial resolution. Taking climate change to the ICJ via the General Assembly is not a silver bullet for increasing climate action, but only one tool to get us closer to the end goal of a safe planet for humanity. That is why, beyond the ICJ, we are also supporting other tools to battle the existential threat of climate change. We call on all states to join the group of nations proposing to include ecocide as the fifth independent crime of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, and thank the nations of Fiji, Samoa, and the Democratic Republic of Congo for their existing support in this regard. Vanuatu maintains that better prevention of future environmental destruction is as fundamentally important as mitigating and adapting to existing damage. We believe that criminalization of the severest forms of environmental destruction at the international level can and should play a crucial role not only in deterring harm but also in protecting the rights of present and future generations. The imposition, Madam President, the imposition of coercive economic measures, including unilateral sanctions against developing countries, is unfair and unjust. It undermines the social and economic development of these countries. Such measures are in violation with the principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. In this respect, we call for the uplift of the economic embargo on the Republic of Cuba. While the United Nations establishes human rights as a fundamental pillar of the organization, human rights challenges continue to persist globally. In the Pacific, the human rights of indigenous people are yet to be adequately addressed and remain a matter of ongoing concern. We acknowledge that in the recent Pacific Islands Forum Leaders Communique, Member States have agreed to a roadmap to address human rights concerns in the region. The decolonization process within the United Nations framework requires enhanced momentum, and it is imperative that sustained dialogue be maintained among all stakeholders. In this regard, Vanuatu notes the ongoing dialogue conducted between the indigenous leaders of New Caledonia and the government of France in Paris this year. This dialogue has resulted in a roadmap, and we hope that this is a start for parties concerned to work collaboratively in finding the best way forward toward a peaceful and progressive future for the people of New Caledonia in the UN Charter. Madam President, 80 years on, the Charter calls us to action to safeguard international peace and security, to strengthen multilateral cooperation, and to ensure that the United Nations continues to serve as a beacon of hope for present and future generations. By returning to the spirit of the Charter, equality of nations, respect for rights, and shared responsibilities, we can meet today's challenges and build a future where no state, large or small, is left behind. Thank you.
I thank the delegation of Vanuatu and his chair. I now give the floor to His Excellency Dionisio da Costa Cabo Soares, chair of the delegation of Timor-Leste.
Excelência Annalena Baerbock,
Your Excellency Annalena Baerbock, President of the General Assembly of the United Nations, on behalf of the government and people of Timor-Leste, I extend warm congratulations to Your Excellency on your well-deserved election as President of the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly. It is an important step in correcting the historical gender imbalance in the leadership of this organization. We also thank your predecessor, Philemon Yang, for the way in which he conducted our work in the previous session. We also pay tribute to the General Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres, for his steadfast leadership in these turbulent times, and above all, for his clear and unique voice in defense of peace. Excellencies, it is a great honor to address this assembly on behalf of Timor-Leste. Our relationship with the United Nations is historic and decisive. For our country, which joined the United Nations family in 2002, following a long struggle for self-determination, the 80th anniversary of the organization is a moment for reflection on the transformative power of multilateralism. Though still young and facing the challenges that follow its difficult history, Timor-Leste today stands as a vibrant democratic state and indisputable symbol of the triumph of the international system. Through the United Nations, we restored our right to independence and laid the foundations for the building of state institutions. Today, this family of nations continues to support us in our sovereign process of development and growth. It is also with the United Nations that we will continue in the international sphere to pursue the path of peace, freedom, equality among peoples, and the right to self-determination in every corner of the world without exemption. At a time when the world seems to be willingly walking towards self-destruction, marked by international and civil conflicts, humanitarian emergencies, the climate catastrophe, and the resulting deepening of inequalities, Timor-Leste reaffirms our firm conviction that the multilateral system is not a choice, but a necessity. The United Nations emerged 80 years ago as a response to the dangers of isolationism and unilateral interventionism. Grounded in the principles of dialogue and the search for collective solutions as instruments for peace, security, and the defense of human rights. The spirit of peace and unity that built this House must be renewed and strengthened in the face of the thousands of victims of today's violence. We all must uphold international law. For small countries like mine, it is the only guarantee of justice, sovereignty, and national independence. It was international law that enabled us to secure sovereignty over our resources following the conciliation process with Australia. It is this system that allowed us to request an advisory opinion from the International Court of Justice on the obligations of states in relation to climate change. This historic opinion determined that the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is inherent to the enjoyment of human rights. The United Nations continues to play a central role in protecting peoples, responding to humanitarian crises, and mediating conflicts, rejecting the isolation of states and unilateralism. Timor-Leste calls for the 80th General Assembly to be a turning point in relation to current conflicts. Ladies and gentlemen, deeply concerned by the erosion of international humanitarian law and the suffering of civilians in ongoing conflicts, Timor-Leste calls on all states to renew their commitment to the peaceful settlement of disputes, to respect international law, and to strengthen the role of the United Nations in conflict prevention. Peace and security remain the cornerstone of the Charter of the United Nations. We believe, however, that the UN cannot and must not delay in implementing the urgent reforms that we have all called for. First and foremost, to ensure its effectiveness in defending and guaranteeing human rights and international law, which are being violated before our very eyes in many parts of the world. The urgency of UN reform lies in addressing the structural impediments that prevent it from fulfilling its most basic mission, to protect lives. To strengthen the global architecture for peace, Timor-Leste proposes that the General Assembly be given greater power and authority in security matters, to prevent a single member state from paralyzing the entire collective security system of the United Nations. We also underline the importance of reforming the Security Council so that it reflects the vitality and reality of the 21st century and gives voice to developing and smaller states. We remain firmly convinced that an expansion of both permanent and non-permanent membership is necessary to reflect contemporary geopolitical realities. It is the right and duty of our nations to aspire to a Security Council that is more accountable, representative, transparent, relevant, and above all, effective. Excellencies, Madam President, our commitment to peace is reflected in the way we relate to the world.
por meio da concertação política, diplomática e da cooperação multilateral no seio da comunidade dos países da língua portuguesa. Timor-Leste inicia o esforço coletivo de promoção da harmonia, solidariedade e inclusão, contribuindo para enfrentar desafios globais e regionais. Como membro da G7+, Timor-Leste tem levado a sua experiência interna de estabilidade pós-conflito para influenciar a agenda global de paz e desenvolvimento sustentável, inspirando ações coordenadas e diplomacia baseada em partilha e troca,
inspiring coordinated action and diplomacy based on sharing and exchange,
na sexta reunião ministerial do
transforming fragility into resilience. At the sixth ministerial meeting of the G7+, held in April 2025 in Dili, Timor-Leste, and fellow conflict-affected countries renewed their commitment to peace-building, resilience, and sustainable development. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, achieving the 17 Sustainable Development Goals and fulfilling the 2030 Agenda must be a priority for all. We are, however, concerned that many of the targets to which we have committed ourselves remain far from being achieved. Timor-Leste formally acceded to the World Trade Organization in 2024, and after a committed path towards fulfilling all eligibility criteria, will, on the 26th of October, become a full member of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, another milestone in our nation-building journey. This is a moment of great significance for national economic development, regional integration, and international recognition, and one of which we are very proud. Timor-Leste has aligned the SDGs with its Strategic Development Plan 2011-2030 and has made notable progress through effective and targeted public policies. With the current government, we are also initiating the energy transition towards renewable energy production and establishing a consolidated policy on the blue economy. Having ratified the Agreement on Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction, BBNJ, in September 2024, Timor-Leste adopted in June of this year the National Strategic Framework for the Blue Economy Policy and Action Plan 2025-2030, focused on the sustainable development of marine resources, improving the livelihoods of coastal communities, and protecting ecosystems. Nonetheless, the achievement of the SDGs does not depend solely on the individual will of each nation. It requires concerted and collaborative global commitment, shared values of humanity, the fight against inequality, peaceful coexistence, and the protection of our only home, the planet Earth. We must not forget the enormous inequalities that persist in the world. For developed countries, achieving the SDGs may be a simple political choice, allocating resources in their budgets. For many others, their realization depends on development, assistance, solidarity, and international cooperation in terms of financial resources and the transfer of knowledge. As part of the G7+, the group of least developed countries and of small island developing states is especially vulnerable to the many factors that threaten the achievement of the SDGs.
It is
necessary to recognize the special circumstances of small island developing states. This is a foundational principle of development since 1992, reflected in the Seville Commitment and the Antigua and Barbuda Agenda for SIDS. The unique vulnerabilities of SIDS with their small size, remote location, and limited resources require tailored and differentiated development approaches. It is particularly urgent to translate commitments into predictable and increased means of implementation. Another relevant aspect in this context is the use of the Multidimensional Vulnerability Index, MVI, and ensuring SIDS have a seat at every table. It is no longer acceptable to hold discussions and make decisions on the issues that most affect us without our participation. The international financial architecture must be reformed so that the MVI is applied in development support policies, access to concessional financing and technical assistance. Climate change is undermining already fragile food security, striking our countries with natural disasters that divert vital resources to reconstruction and humanitarian relief. For this reason, it is particularly important, especially for industrialized countries and major polluters, that commitments under the Paris Agreement and the Glasgow Climate Pact be honored with the allocation of resources for true climate justice. The opportunity to achieve these objectives before us at COP30 in Belém this November. It is our opportunity to channel ambition in the right direction, honoring the Seville commitment. It is also imperative to advance AI and digital capabilities in LDCs while concurrently safeguarding cybersecurity. This requires investing in digital infrastructure, enhancing digital literacy, and implementing e-government initiatives, promoting AI research and innovation, cultivating talent, and establishing a policy framework are also pivotal for fostering growth. Nonetheless, international cooperation remains essential to establish comprehensive regulations governing the use and development of AI. Madam President, Excellencies, this past May, Timor-Leste hosted the Regional Conference of the United Nations Special Committee on Decolonization. This meeting had profound significance for the committee and for all who value self-determination, democracy, and human dignity. Holding this conference for the first time on Timorese soil allowed participants to witness our example as a success story, to renew collective hope for freedom and solidarity, reaffirming the crucial role of the United Nations in defending peoples. That same week in Dili, we hosted the first Asia-Pacific Solidarity Conference for Western Sahara. The voice of the Sahrawi people, silenced for half a century on the international stage, needs and deserves our attention and our collective strategic action. Timor-Leste's connection with the history of Western Sahara is of a moral nature. The words of our Prime Minister, Kai Rala Xanana Guzmão, the suffering of the Sahrawi people was a lesson for Timor-Leste when we decided our own popular consultation since the postponement in 1992 of the referendum promised to Western Sahara marked all those who dreamed of independence. As the suffering of the Timorese people came to an end before that of our brothers and sisters, we will always in this House and in every forum of dialogue be amplifiers of the right to self-determination of Western Sahara, calling for a collective resolution of the conflict. Drawing on its own experience of occupation and prolonged suffering, Timor-Leste continues to advocate for dialogue, mediation, and multilateral engagement in the pursuit of peaceful, lasting, and sustainable solution as the path to peace. Timor-Leste therefore welcomes the overwhelming adoption on 12 September of the New York Declaration on the Peaceful Settlement of the Question of the Middle East and implementation of the two-state solution. Timor-Leste recognized the State of Palestine in 2004, 2 years after its own independence. We did not, however, imagine we would witness the conflict escalating to the tragic proportions we see today. It is urgent to implement the roadmap set out in the adopted declaration, in particular, an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, the release of all hostages, the establishment of a sovereign Palestinian state with the support and collaboration of the international community, as well as the disarmament of Hamas and the normalization of relations between Israel and neighboring Arab states, in order to guarantee collective security in the region. Even more urgent is the response to the humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip. After the situation of famine and genocide in the region was officially declared, we must waste no more time on terminology. Despite the clarity of the reports, the world remains the immediate demands the immediate unblocking of large-scale humanitarian operations and the guarantee of security and respect for human dignity in the delivery of international assistance. We are, however, deeply concerned that the intensification of Israel's military offensive in Gaza in the wake of peace efforts made here in New York in recent weeks, faced with the humanitarian catastrophe where famine already exists, the consequences will be devastating and irreversible for the civilian population. We reiterate the urgent need to reform the Organization and its Security Council, which continue to prevent us from upholding the founding principles of the United Nations and from saving Gaza. Madam President, Excellencies, in Ukraine, we also witnessed the devastating consequences of unilateralism and the disregard for international law. The cost will be borne by all of us. Timor-Leste expresses its deep concern over the great human rights violations and the humanitarian and environmental consequences of the Russian war of aggression against Ukraine, including ongoing attacks against essential infrastructure, which have caused devastating impacts on the civilian population, including women and children. We call on all parties to the conflict to comply with their obligations under international humanitarian law to spare civilians and civilian objects, to ensure the safety of all in accessing humanitarian relief, and to refrain from attacking and destroying items indispensable to civilian survival. We cannot ignore the many of other theaters of violence and instability that weigh heavily on our common conscience, from the Sahel to the Horn of Africa, from the Great Lakes region to Haiti and Southeast Asia, right on our doorstep. Each of these crises carries its own history and complexity, yet they share a tragic pattern: the suffering of civilians, the erosion of trust in institutions, and the perpetuation of cycles of displacement and loss. Our collective responsibility is to ensure that none of these situations are consigned to silence or neglect. They demand not only humanitarian relief and respect for international law, but also the sustained investment of this organization in prevention, dialogue, and inclusive political solutions that restore hope and dignity to those who endure them. There can be no justice without accountability. At a time when violations of international law, including international humanitarian law and acts of aggression, are on the rise, it is urgent that we all promote and defend our institutions and their work. We are deeply concerned by the imposition of sanctions on judges and other elected officials of the International Criminal Court, and we call for their immediate lifting. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, Timor-Leste strongly supports the lifting of the economic, commercial, and financial embargo against the Republic of Cuba, which we consider a violation of human rights that harms the Cuban people and limits their access to essential goods. Cuba is one of Timor-Leste's strongest partners in the health sector, having trained more than 1,000 professionals and provided direct assistance to our patients in hospitals. With its active role in development assistance and in promoting peace, we consider Cuba's inclusion on the list of state sponsors of terrorism entirely unjustified, and therefore call for its immediate removal from the list. In the same spirit, we are also concerned by the imposition of unilateral coercive measures, such as those currently applied to Venezuela. These sanctions impose suffering on the Venezuelan people, hinder the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, and leave many behind. We call for dialogue and negotiation between the parties to alleviate the misery that afflicts the Venezuelan people. Excellencies, Madam President, To conclude,
esta
this 80th session of the General Assembly reminds us that the United Nations, though imperfect, remains our greatest common instrument for peace and collective progress. The values enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations, the sovereignty of states, respect for human rights, the peaceful settlement of disputes, and cooperation for development remain the compass that guides us. Let us therefore renew our commitment to multilateralism, not as an abstract principle, but as a daily practice of listening, compromise, and joint action. Timor-Leste, through its hard-won independence, stands as proof that when the international community acts with unity and determination, even the smallest and most fragile states can take their rightful place in the family of nations. As demonstrated by the race to ratify the agreement of biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction, which will enter into force on 17th January 2026, it is in multilateralism, in respect for international law, and in inclusive dialogue among all of us that hope resides for a better world for generations to come. Thank you very much.
I thank the Chair of Delegation of Timor-Leste. We've heard the last speaker in the general debate. I will now deliver my closing remarks. Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, at the beginning of this week, we referred to the United Nations as the House of Diplomacy and Dialogue, standing at a crossroads, a place where we gather to have hard conversations during challenging times. If this high-level week is an indication, this House is fulfilling that purpose. The United Nations is still relevant. Over the past week, we have heard from 189 member states, including 124 heads of state and government. Delegations, I thank you for your proactive leadership, for embracing diplomacy, for not shying away from the hard topics, for proving why our United Nations remains critical, especially facing a crossroads. I would like to thank the host country, the United States, for their continued and generous support, reminding that the host country agreement obliges to give access to all delegations, as otherwise the House of Diplomacy would not work. I express my deep gratitude to the City of New York, particularly the NYPD, as well as colleagues across the UN Secretariat for making the high-level week possible. Finally, I thank my OPGA team, led by my chef de cabinet, for their tireless dedication, their countless briefing notes, and for being my ears and eyes throughout this high-level week. Across the week, certain themes resonated above all others. Chief among them, peace and security. Gaza, Ukraine, Sudan, and the many forgotten ones. The clear message was, member states must do more to stem the tide of war and violence, to protect and feed starving civilians in Gaza, to return to peace to Ukraine, to protect women and girls in Sudan. This organization is only as strong as our collective will to uphold the principles of our Charter and international law. And when we do, progress follows. Monday's high-level international conference on the peaceful settlement of the question of Palestine demonstrated clearly that what happens in this hall matters. The conference, coupled with the New York Declaration, showed diplomatic movement on an issue long considered immovable. But while we are gaining traction politically on the ground, the situation remains catastrophic and unacceptable. We should not delude ourselves. The real test now is whether the momentum generated here can be translated into tangible, short-term measures in and for Gaza. An immediate ceasefire, a surge in humanitarian aid for the civilians, the immediate release of the remaining hostages, and lay the foundation for a peaceful, long-term perspective, the realization of the two-state solution. The only way to achieve lasting peace, security, and dignity for both Israelis and Palestinians. The Charter is not only a blueprint for peace, it's also a vision for shared progress across every pillar. Dozens of delegations spoke on the impacts of climate change and the ticking clock we face in delivering on the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. That clock does not stop while we are here in this room. I don't know if you were in the hall, but as the Prime Minister of the Bahamas was delivering his remarks here, his country back home was bracing. It's happening now. Climate crisis won't stop if we deny it. The climate crisis is the biggest security threat in this century. We face it together or we suffer alone. Conversely, if we work together to tackle climate change, we can capitalize on the benefits all together. Last year alone, investment in renewable energy amounted to $2 trillion. So as you can see, there are also positive tipping points. Looking at the amount invested in renewable energy, there's no way back, as no investor wants stranded investments. And thus I commend member states who joined the UN Climate Summit and pledged stronger, more ambitious climate targets in the light of COP30 in Belém. However, we are still not as far as we need to be, and financing is the clear obstacle. Financial reform was mentioned repeatedly throughout the general debate and discussed in detail during the first biennial summit for a sustainable, inclusive and resilient global economy. The commitment made in 2015, repeated last year in the Pact for the Future, must be met. To build resilience for countries facing ruinous climate consequences, we need to unlock financing. The technology is there, the need is there, we now have to match it. And make no mistake, this is not charity. Addressing these borderless challenges and financing sustainable development is an investment in our collective future. Investing into green technologies and fighting the climate crisis is our best security protection. Excellencies, I would also like to take this opportunity to commend delegations for engaging in sometimes challenging discussions around SDG-related issues, including the high-level meeting on non-communicable diseases and mental health, the 30th anniversary of the World Programme of Action on Youth, and the Global Dialogue on Artificial Intelligence. The discussion on AI in particular lent only further credence on the argument that we are better together. Few of us would be comfortable leaving the benefits or risk of this immense resource in the hands of a few. The opportunities are vast, as we discussed all together, from farmers accessing plans for resilient seeds, to city planning, to disaster risk management. AI is a tool that must be harnessed for all of humankind, equally in a controlled manner. This last point bears repeating, as the risks of AI are becoming only more prevalent, and age-old biases are being perpetuated by algorithm. As you can see, for example, when 99% of sexual-related deepfakes are targeting women and girls. Yet, as we also heard and saw on Monday's celebration of 30 years since Beijing, when female leaders spoke, one after the other, there's power in joining forces, in taking the right course at the crossroads, and doing the right thing. So many strong female presidents, many, the first of their country, all reminded us that women's rights are the yardstick of freedom of a society. If women are not free, eventually no one will be free. But the opposite is also true. If women are free, finally everyone will be free. If women are not represented equally or participate equally in societies, economies perform worse. Some estimates note that closing the gender gap would add 7 trillion to the global GDP. And a few words through applause from this audience as often as that of the mention of a future possible Madam Secretary General. Excellencies, throughout the week there were moments of energy, even electricity, where we really felt the collective will to do better, to reach further, to choose the right path at the crossroads. It's an energy that reminds us that this institution indeed matters, that we need it more than ever, an energy that also proclaims now is the time to grow and change. Colleagues, this is an energy, a moment in time that we need to grab and run with. And the conditions are there. Indeed, UN 80 and the reform agenda was, as they say, the hot topic throughout the week. The Secretary General's report on mandate implementation review, the revised budget and his proposals for structural changes and programmatic realignments offer us a concrete pathway to make this institution better, stronger, more effective, fit for purpose. But this is not only about trimming budgets. It's about strengthening delivery. It is about priorities. For that reason, it is important that delegations take the discussions here back to their capitals. Discuss also back home in national parliaments how every support and implement these processes in a way that make this institution work better, deliver better. For all of us, but especially for those who still look to the streaming blue flag as a sign of hope, even in the darkest hours. For those who have the benefit of living in peace and social security, and, as recent surveys showed, even in spite of all global narratives, still value the benefits and necessities of the UN. On this point, I would like to thank the many, many delegations who responded to my call for positive reflection on the UN's 80th anniversary. We have heard dozens of statements infused with this theme of better together. of countries who freed themselves from colonialism to join as an independent state the family of nations, of countries like my own who reunified because of the international community, of countries who sought support from the UN for mediation, for peacekeeping, for democratic reform, for aid and relief. Even if we have not always succeeded. But the point is that we have always tried. Excellencies, these examples highlight specifically why this organization was created: to tackle the problems no country alone can solve, to support others in their times of need. This week's general debate, with strong engagements and impassioned words, showed that we are capable of finding the strength to lift up our common leadership, to find collective solutions, and to take the right path at the crossroads. Let us go forward in this spirit. As also outlined in our just launched year-long campaign, let us be inspired by the legacy of our past and daring for a better future, that is, better together, unafraid, unbroken, united. I thank you. The exercise of the right of reply has been requested. May I remind members that statements in the exercise of the right of reply are limited to 10 minutes for the first intervention and to 5 minutes for the second intervention, and should be made by delegations from their seats. I call on the representative of Mali.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President.
La délégation du Mali n'a pas pour habitude d'exercer un droit de réponse.
Mali does not aim to exercise its right of reply.
Les attaques personnelles,
Nonetheless, personal attacks, condescending attacks, which by the Algerian Minister of Foreign Affairs compel us to intervene, to correct the untruths we heard. Out of respect for the decorum of this august assembly and the good that the United Nations embodies, my delegation will not lower itself to the level of the invective and basically indecent attacks proffered by the Algerian Minister of Foreign Affairs. By doing this, Algeria deliberately decided not to mention at all the events which resulted in unprecedented tensions between our two countries. On our side, we would like to reiterate what Mali has said earlier. This is the statement delivered by Abdoulaye Maiga, Prime Minister and Head of Government of the Republic of Mali on the 26th of September 2025. He recalls that current tensions between our two countries are rooted in, first and foremost, in the unacceptable interference of the Algerian regime in the internal affairs of Mali. The Malian people decided to take charge of its fate and to take ownership of the peace process. There were then disputes regarding the destruction by the Algerian armed defense forces of surveillance and reconnaissance drones of the Malian armed and security forces in the night between the 35th of March and the 1st of April 2025. A few hours after the incident transpired, the Malian government learned from the press of a communique issued by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Algeria, claiming ownership for the destruction of a drone which purportedly violated Algerian airspace 2 kilometers. In order to conduct an in-depth investigation, the Malian authorities requested from the Algerian authorities to provide them the evidence underpinning their allegations. Over 72 hours later, no satisfactory follow-up was provided by the Algerian party. Following our own investigations and on the basis of scientific proof that was published on the 6th of April 2025 in a communique, the government of Mali drew a conclusion of which it is absolutely certain the drone of the Malian Armed Security Forces was destroyed following a premeditated hostile act waged by the Algerian regime. This conclusion is underpinned by the following. First, the guilty silence of the regime in Algeria and its refusal to cooperate. Second, specific data about the trajectory of the aircraft recorded by our systems unambiguously proves that the drone never left the airspace of the Republic of Mali. What's more is liaison with the drone and location information, all of it is located on understand these allegations of supposed violation of Algerian airspace are absolutely absurd in light of the above. After all, the debris of the drone was found within Malian territory, over 9 kilometers from the Algerian border. How could it have ended up there if it was within Algerian territory, 2 kilometers within? This violates the laws of physics. It's simply impossible. It's simply impossible for the drone to have ended up there. This is clearly an unprecedented attack, unprecedented in the relationship between our two countries. This hostile act, unfriendly and condescending, is further proof, if there was any need for it, of the fact that the Algerian regime is sponsoring international terrorism in Mali and the Sahel. Indeed, the destruction of the Malian drone clearly sought to undermine the neutralization of armed groups who have claimed terrorist groups, claimed that they've conducted terrorist acts. Faced with these attacks and a refusal to cooperate on the part of the Algerian regime, the government of the Republic of Mali decided to institute proceedings with the International Court of Justice. Regrettably, even though it's unsurprising, it's regrettable that the Algerian regime refused to recognize the jurisdiction of the ICJ. As a way of defending itself, the Algerian regime claims to respect this international jurisdiction. It's easy to see that this Malian drone that was shot down is a source of embarrassment for the junta in Algeria. Indeed, if the Algerian regime had any respect for the international system as it claims to have, it would have accepted to submit supposed proof it has at its disposal to the ICJ. The Algerian regime, through its actions, is rejecting international legality. This attests to the fact that it is clearly guilty. The lack of transparency on the part of Algeria vis-à-vis the ICJ is grist to the mill of the Malian government. That is, the fact that the drone was destroyed. It's further proof of the fact that Algeria supports terrorist groups. The government of Mali deplores the fact that instead of responding to the facts we've established and documented, the Algerian regime has opted for defamatory invective to try and conceal its support for extremist groups, including the terrorist leaders that were targeted by the downed Malian drone. We denounce this flagrant violation committed by Algeria against my country in contravention of Mali's efforts to support the FLN and the support we provided to our neighbors, our brothers, our friends, the people of Algeria during their liberation struggle. Thus, the government of Mali
Par conséquent, le gouvernement du Mali réitère son appel au régime algérien
its call for
à cesser
the Algerian
ces
regime
ingérences
to put an end
intempestives et inacceptables dans les affaires
to this
intérieures du
unacceptable
Mali
interference in the domestic
et son
affairs of
soutien aux
Mali,
formations
as well as
terroristes qui
its support
déstabilisent le
to
Sahel.
terrorist groups which are
Le
destabilizing the
régime
Sahel.
algérien gagnerait à concentrer
The
ses efforts
Algerian
et son
regime would be
énergie
better served
sur ses
to
propres
focus its
contradictions
efforts
et
on its own
défis de
contradictions
gouvernance ô
and the
combien
government's
importants
challenges,
et
which are
desquels il
vast
veut détourner l'attention.
and
Nous
from which
renouvelons
it
notre
has been
appel au régime
distracted.
algérien à changer
We
d'approche,
call on the Algerian
à améliorer
regime
ses
to
relations
change
avec
its
ses
approach
voisins et à
and to
travailler de
improve its
bonne foi à
relations
la
with neighbors, working in
stabilité,
good faith
à la sécurité collective,
for
au
stability,
développement durable dans la
collective
région,
security, and
dans
sustainable
le
development
respect
in
de
the
la
region,
souveraineté des
in
États.
full respect for the sovereignty of
termine en
states.
rassurant
By way of conclusion, I'd like
que
to
le gouvernement
reassure
du
you
Mali ne ménagera
that the
aucun
Malian
effort
government will spend no
pour
effort
défendre le territoire national
in defending our
et
national
pour assurer la
territory
protection des
and
personnes et
ensuring
des biens.
that
Je vous
we
remercie.
protect our people and our property. I thank you.
I call on the representative of Morocco, followed by Algeria.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam President.
Le Maroc voudrait exercer son
Morocco would
droit
like
de
to
réponse
exercise
suite
its
à
right to
l'intervention
reply